thank you to Charles and colleagues at the North East London Teaching Partnership. It's great to be able to come and talk to you today about anti-racism in social work, something that I'm very passionate about and something that I'm on a learning journey as I have been throughout my career, and I hope today that together we'll be on that learning journey even more, kind of exploring some of the issues that are coming up potentially for you within your practice, things that you might have questions about. And it's really great that we're having 2 sessions with the Teaching Partnership as well. So it'll be my colleague Wayne Reed that comes, I think, to talk to you in July, or talk to colleagues in July. So as Anna's kind of kindly done all the kind of housekeeping, which is really, really helpful, as she was saying, there's no requirement for you to have your camera on unless you would like to speak or ask me something, and I'm more than happy for you to come in at any point. If you'd like to stop me and ask something, we can have a discussion. I'll be behind the slides and I'll come back out, and then we can just have that discussion in the room, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a second when I put the slides up. So to say a huge thank you again. I'm really excited to be here, and I know that we're in for an interesting, thought-provoking and reflective afternoon. So Liana's kindly agreed to kind of manage and monitor the chat for me as well, so please feel free to use that. I'm happy for you to post comments in there if you prefer to communicate that way. That's great. And as you say, if you want to come in, Liana will be the person that's kind of monitoring that for me. Either just come in verbally or raise your hand icon. Again, I'm an MS Teams user as well, so I'm a bit confused about where everything is on Zoom, but I know there is a kind of hand icon. I think it's in the reactions, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's in the reactions up there. Okay, and we are going to have a break at 8 p.m. I'm fully aware that 3 hours is an incredibly long time. Anybody to be engaged in anything in real life, as in face-to-face, or in the online environment as well. So we will make sure that we have a comfort break, but I'm sure once we get to the end of the session, we'll wonder where that time has gone due to the kind of material and the discussions that we're likely to be having. So I'll just start to share my screen now and then do a bit of an introduction. And what I'm going to do with the first couple of slides is just introduce the organisation that I work for, which is the British Association of Social Workers. I'm sure that we'll have some members in the room, which is great. Maybe something that I'll share with you might not know about the organisation, that will be new to you, but if you're not a member, it's just an opportunity to talk to you a bit more about how we support social work and how we support social workers and how we've arrived at this point with the work that we're doing around anti-racism. Okay, I'll just pop it in and bring those slides up. Okay, I'm just gonna, there we go, from the beginning. Great. Charles, will you just nod if you can see those? Okay. Yeah, great. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to leave those on the screen for a moment and just pause while I do a kind of a bit more of an introduction. So in terms of our organisation I work for, sorry, just checking if you just joined us, folks, if you just wouldn't mind popping yourself on mute, that would be really good. Great, thank you. Yeah, sorry. So just to kind of start us off, the organisation I work for, the British Association of Social Workers, you know, we're very proud and privileged to be able to come and talk to teaching partnerships like yours, organisations up and down the country, kind of wanting to find out more, wanting to learn more about anti-racism in social work. And we as an organisation have arrived at this point, particularly because we feel very strongly about the need for anti-racist practice in social work to be explored and continue to be explored. We've got a very important role as a professional association in terms of leading on anti-racism in social work. And I'm aware that obviously this is part of a commitment from the Teaching Partnership to run sessions to support you in your learning and development as well. It's really positive, you know, to be here, to be part of that learning and development as well. And hopefully through the presentation, you'll be able to consider what's happening in your organisation around anti-racism. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you feeling? And this presentation will hopefully give you some ideas about maybe how to raise issues or how to challenge things within the settings that you're working within as well. So it's obvious that really, I think as an association for social workers, that we are rooted in social justice, just as we are as the profession. And that makes us ideally placed to really be kind of leading work around anti-racism in social work. It's fair to say, though, I think particularly over the last 12 months, there have been varying responses from the profession and the professionals, and us as the professional workers that work within our profession, both to the Black Lives Matter movement and to the murder of George Floyd. And we're going to be looking at that in some more detail today. As an organisation, we are very keen to build on the momentum and push for change, keep the pressure on, keep raising the issues and highlight at national level the discrimination and oppression that's experienced by Black and ethnic minority people, families and communities. And I think there's a real danger as social workers, and I include myself in this as well, and in terms of organisational leadership, that we become really complacent about racism and we stop talking about it. We stop asking questions, we think that things have gone away, or we think because we are social workers that we're automatically anti-racist in our practice. And actually that assumption is quite harmful, which is why it's really important. And I'm going to talk more about that kind of lifelong commitment to learning about anti-racism. It's really important as a profession that we do make that commitment and that we don't become complacent. Today is really a kind of starting point in terms of us together and being able to have conversations about racism and about anti-racism and about kind of what's been happening over the last 12 months and what we think about that, and also what we think about what's happening within social work around anti-racism as well. And we will, I suspect, be talking about things which are controversial and uncomfortable and can be quite sensitive. And I just want to reiterate that I really hope that this afternoon that we can create a safe space to be able to explore those issues together with respect for views that people might be expressing, but also if challenge is needed, that we can do that in a professional way as we would in any kind of other arena. But I think it's really important that we do create a space where we're open to listening and we're open to sharing and learning from each other. So not just in this space as well, actually, I think that's a principle that we need to think about in terms of the organisations that we work for and work within. I'm really thinking about how we do create those safe spaces to be able to talk about issues relating to racism and the experience of our colleagues and people and families and communities that we're working with. So I just think it's important that we do acknowledge the sensitivity and kind of really think about what that experience is like on a daily basis for people that are experiencing racism, and how we can start to make sure that this is not silenced, that this is part of us being able to explore and examine issues together. The other thing that I just want to say about the presentation is that the presentation that I'm going to show you today, the original material, some of the original material in here has been developed by my colleague Wayne Reid, who's coming to talk in July. Wayne is also a professional officer at BASW England, just as I am, so he's a colleague of mine. He's also now in a role for taking a lead around anti-racism across England as well for our organisation. He's designed and developed the original presentation with some of the original material. What I've done with the presentation, because I'm not coming from a perspective of lived experience of racism, is that I've adapted some of that material and I've included things that reflect the perspective that I'm coming from, which is as a white ally. I'm very much on that journey to allyship as well, and I hope that what I'm sharing with you is coming from an honest perspective. It's coming from where my learning and experience comes from, but that's not a perspective of lived experience. So I just kind of wanted to make that point at this stage. And it's fair to say that if anyone follows Wayne on Twitter or is aware of Wayne's work, which I know some people are in the room today, that he's been absolutely prolific in championing anti-racism in social work throughout his career, and particularly in terms of the work that's been happening over the last 12 months. So if you are someone that's on social media or you're interested in social media, do take a look at our organisation Twitter feed. I've put the handle there at BASW_UK on the screen. I've also put my personal Twitter handle on there, which I use for work purposes. And I'm happy for anyone in the room to follow me if you're interested in finding out more about the kind of things that I and passionate about in social work and that I'm championing, please do follow me and follow the organisation as well. And I'm also put my email address there in case anyone would like to get in touch with me after the presentation today to ask any specific questions or make any comments. I'm more than happy for people to get in touch, and I will be asking for feedback about how people have found the presentation today after the session. So just to let you know that. The other thing to say as well is that although we're calling it a session, we've called it different things, this today is a presentation. It's not a training session as such, because that would have to mean that we're using different group work and different things like that. So just to be clear, it is a presentation, but there is the opportunity for questions and answers and interaction, and it's designed to be the start of conversations around racism and anti-racism in social work to support your practice. Okay. So it'd be really helpful for me, I suppose as well, you know, kind of putting in the chat, if you want to put in the chat, maybe some of the things that you were hoping to get from today, or some of the things that you're hoping that we explore, or that you maybe want to ask a particular question about. I'm happy for you to share that in the chat, and that I would welcome that, and we can pick that up as we go along through the presentation. So just to reiterate again, I'm just going to share some information about our organisation, but just that bit about the safe space really. And, you know, potentially when we're discussing things today, that might throw up issues that haven't come up for people before, or that might be quite difficult, potentially traumatic and painful. And just for us all to be sensitive to that and the space that we're exploring things in, so that we can learn and develop together safely. Okay. So I'll move us on. So this is how the presentation will kind of work today. I'll talk to you a bit about my social work background, just so that you know a bit about me and where I'm coming from, because I think that's important to know. A bit about the association, just in case you don't know, and just important as well, I think, because of the kind of history of our organisation and where we're at with our anti-racism commitment. We're going to be covering information around George Floyd's murder, and thinking particularly around why that has been such a catalyst for the activity that we've seen around anti-racism and racism itself in the last 12 months. To talk about Black Lives Matter and why that's relevant to social work as well. Really thinking about what does anti-racism mean? What's it all about? What do we need to be able to know and understand in order to start to examine our own practice in relation to anti-racism? And also then thinking about organisational responses to anti-racism, and what have we learnt about that over the last 12 months. Then there'll be some time to look at implementing anti-racism in social work, and then we're going to have time for questions as we move throughout the presentation. I'm sure there'll be particular points that people are interested in wanting to discuss and ask questions about. Okay. So that's just a bit about me. I've been a social worker for the last 20 years, coming up for 21 years this year. I've held a number of different roles. That's just a snapshot of some of those. I've worked in the voluntary sector, the statutory sector, and health in social work roles. I've been in learning and development roles, as well as frontline practice, managerial roles. I'm a best interest assessor. I do independent work for the Court of Protection. I've been in an ASYE coordinator role, so I've been supporting people in their first year in practice. I was on a secondment with Social Work England, the new regulator, or the regulator now, not the new regulator, to establish that organisation to be set up. That's based in Sheffield, which is where I live. So that was a really good opportunity, and I was a strategic social work engagement lead for them. I've done support work as well with people with learning disabilities, physical disabilities, and I've done some crossover work with children and families, particularly working with people with learning disabilities that are parents, and also people with brain injuries that are parents as well, to support people around their parenting. So that's just kind of a snapshot of me. Although my work has been predominantly across adult social work, I have done that crossover work with children and families as well. And I've been in my current role as an employee with BASW for about the last 18 months. And I've been a BASW member for about the last 6 or 7 years. Okay. So a little bit about our association. Again, just I think it's important to kind of set the context about who we are and what we're all about. So we have been around for 50 years. We celebrated our 50th anniversary in 2020, which was quite a different experience than the one that we were expecting due to the pandemic. So we had a series of online celebrations. If any of you are members, you might have caught some of that, and if you haven't, that's all available on our website. And I think that's a really major achievement, because 50 years is a long time, and during that time we've seen a lot of changes in terms of social work and the way that, you know, our profession is viewed, the way that we carry out what we do in our profession, and particularly our commitment to anti-racist practice as well, and how that's been shaped and changed by social work education over that period of time. So we operate across the UK. We're there to act for social work and social workers. That's our key aim. Is we're there to ensure that we promote and champion and support the voice of social workers, and that we ensure that social work's perspective is included in what's going on nationally, regionally, and locally as well. So we're all about seeking to promote the profession and the interests of those who are working within the profession as well. We've got over 21,000 members. We've got actually over 22,000 members across the UK, and we are the strong independent voice of social work and social workers. So we're nothing to do with the government. We're not funded by the government. We're funded through our membership, which means that we can be totally independent, and we can lobby, and we can influence, and we can create change based on what our membership is telling us and what we know about what's needed in terms of social work as well. What do we do for social work and social workers? There's a kind of snapshot of images of various different things that we do. So we create guidance, policy, information, top tips, online resources, anything to do with supporting social work practice, both in terms of continuous professional development, also in practice, and also to help guide social workers, particularly around ethics, around our social work values. Lots and lots of material and resources there to enhance, support and strengthen social work practice. We also run a number of events and conferences, which are all about kind of getting social workers together to examine different issues, explore those together, get a real sense of what we're saying as a collective about what these issues are in contemporary practice. We do have a professional support service, we have a mentoring service. All those services are available for our members to support, offer coaching, offer assistance with particular issues. We have advice and representation service as well, if people need that for issues that might be happening around their employment circumstances. So that's just kind of a snapshot of the sorts of things that we offer through our membership. Bit more about that, you'll see the images here on the screen. We've got the code of ethics. So we have developed the code of ethics, and again that's evolved and changed over the 50 years that we've been in operation. Through the pandemic, there's also been an addition to the code of ethics that we've developed in partnership with social workers, particularly thinking about the sorts of ethical dilemmas and challenges that are coming up for social work, working in a very different way in an online environment quite often. We've got an addition to that document that's available not just for our members, but any social worker to access and use. We're the custodians of the professional capabilities framework, so that's the rainbow, and I'm sure if you're involved with the teaching partnership, that's something that you're probably familiar with if you weren't through your training. And I know we've got some students in the room who will be particularly familiar with the professional capabilities framework and how that kind of underpins learning and development at every stage in our social work career. We've got a number of different groups that operate across the association, and different groups that have kind of evolved, particularly over the last year. So we've got our children and families specialist group, adults, mental health, criminal justice, student newly qualified social workers group. We've also got our Black professionals symposium group as well, which is something that Wayne has been instrumental in getting off the ground, along with BASW members from across the country from Black and ethnic minority communities. So we've got big groups. We've also got an equality and diversity and inclusion group. I think there's a few more as well that have kind of evolved and changed over time. But that's all in recognition that there are different areas of social work that people might want to focus their attention on or might be passionate about. So any of our members can join any of those groups and that's all about being involved in developing policy, responding to what's going on nationally through consultations or developing position statements, and making sure very much that that voice of social work and the people that we support is right at the heart of everything. We've got branches. They're up and down the country, and they're just basically groups of social workers who live in particular geographical areas that want to get together and you know, meet collectively as social workers to kind of maybe think about issues that are happening locally, or things that they want to do in terms of supporting social workers around their CPD or networking, all those kind of things. So they're very much grassroots. Lots of the organisation and the branches, and we've got quite a few of those up and down the country. I support more of the ones that are in my neck of the woods up here, but I do know that there is a London branch as well. So if there are any BASW members in the room and you want to find out more about that, there'll be some information that comes to you after today's presentation where you can have a look at that. Lots of events, conferences and webinars, policy and research activities, so we're involved in that. We're very much involved in as part of the International Federation of Social Workers as well, so we haven't just got that UK perspective, we've very much got that global perspective as well, and very much linked in with what's happening there across the globe. And we do a lot of liaison with stakeholders, and in particular the new regulator, Social Work England, so issues that we're championing, you know, and trying to shine a light on at the moment with regard to that are things that are going on with fitness to practice, what's happening around continuous professional development, professional standards, education and training standards, and to make sure that we are you know, voicing the concerns that social workers might have about those things, and ensuring that the regulator can respond to those. Okay, that's just a bit more about what we do. So the parliamentary work, we frequently have questions asked in Prime Minister's Question Time and other parliamentary debate. We've got a parliamentary officer that's linked to our organisation that supports and facilitates all of that. Training career development is very at the heart of what we do. We have a union who's there to represent social workers who are all social work trained themselves. All our advice and representation service are all social workers as well. So everything that we do within the organisation is fully geared towards social work. Talked a bit about the groups there, Black and Ethnic Minority Professionals Symposium, and we're frequently in the media, again championing issues, talking about what's happening for social work and enabling our members to appear as part of media presentations, and that's either through television work, radio, online, in print, and we've done a lot of that particularly over the pandemic in ensuring that, you know, our perspective. We've heard a lot from health during the pandemic, but we've certainly made sure that the voice of social work is in there wherever we possibly can. And our main function is all about promoting that collective professional identity so that we've got a really, really strong voice at a national level. Okay. So that's a bit about us, and if you're interested in finding out more about us and you don't know about us already, I'm happy to kind of share that information afterwards when I email the full presentation through to Charles to share with you. So bringing us back to today's topic, I'm just going to pause a moment while we have that slide and you can take in some of the images on there. Throughout the presentation, there'll be images that you might want to consider more, you might want to think about, you might want to pause for a moment. There'll also be things within the presentation that you'll see underlined. So when you get the presentation through yourselves, the idea is that this is the kind of starting point for conversations and discussions and your learning as well. So there'll be things that you can just click on that will take you through to other material or webinars or written resources or images, just to help you to think more about, you know, those particular topic areas or those particular themes or concepts. So this really is, you know, a really kind of rich learning resource as well as accompanying the presentation today. Okay, let's just move us on. Okay, so we're going to start, or I'm going to start, I suppose, the presentation today really by providing my perspective on anti-racism in social work. And I think it's really important when we're talking about racism and anti-racism that we're honest with ourselves and others about where we're at, where we're coming from, and maybe, you know, what we know and what we don't know, and being prepared to challenge what we know as well. So I'm a white woman, and I'm from a working class background, and it says there that I'm an ally. What I would say, and that I put that when I was developing the presentation, but actually what I would say, since I've been delivering the anti-racism and social work presentation and the work that I've been undertaking myself this last year, is that I'm on a journey to allyship. I'm not a complete package. I'm learning all the time, and there is so much that I don't know. There are things that I've developed through, obviously, my professional learning, through my training, through my practice, but I'm by no means a complete finished product as an ally. So I ought to amend that actually and say that, you know, I am on that journey to allyship, and on the journey to authentic allyship as well. So not just saying that I'm an ally, actually showing through my actions and the things that I do through my work, but also in my personal life as well, that I'm committed to being an anti-racist ally in all that I do. So I sit alongside my Black and ethnic minority colleagues at BASW, both in my profession and with the people and communities we support in solidarity. And in terms of my experience and where I'm coming from and how I've arrived at this point, I'm being, obviously, I've said at the beginning, I'm not coming from that perspective of lived experience. I haven't experienced the racism that my colleagues and the people and families that we work with have experienced in relation to the colour of the skin. And I'm conscious that I do want to be pointing that out. So that's not the perspective I'm coming from. I'm definitely talking from the allies' perspective and not one from lived experience. So a bit about me, in terms of my working class background, my family originates from Ireland. That's on my great-grandma's side, and they came to the UK, and in particular settled in the northwest in Wigan, which is a post-industrial town in the northwest. So it's kind of one of those Greater Manchester kind of areas, and was the hub and hive of activity in the industrial age, and now unfortunately, and when I was growing up, suffered incredibly through economic deprivation. It was a predominantly white community that I grew up in there, very traditional white working class northern town. There wasn't much migration going on. People didn't kind of go on holidays or go out of their area really. Everything was kind of very, very concentrated in that area. And it's fair to say that the number of black faces or people of different colour, you know, in my community, that wasn't something that I saw at all. And when I was how old? I think when I was 10, we moved to Shropshire, which is again another very rural area of the country, and again predominantly white community. So my experience of seeing people that looked different to me didn't come until my teenage years, when I was fortunate enough to be able to go abroad for the first time. And that was because my dad had been asked to do some work for a bank at the time, and had been asked to do some work out in Jamaica. And that was the first time that we went abroad as a family. So it was my mum and my sister and myself and my dad over there at the time. And we had the privilege of staying with a Jamaican family for some of the time that we were there. And that was a complete eye-opener to me. The first time that I'd been in a different community where I was the minority, and my family were the minority, but also the experience that the family that we were staying with had in terms of racism. That was a concept that I'd never hadn't seen, experienced, or been introduced to before. And for us, a family, that was a complete eye-opener and education to us. The family that we stayed with experienced police brutality. There were issues around access to education, to money, to employment, and that it's fair to say that holiday did change us as a family in terms of our perspective on the world, and the understanding that the world was not quite as we understood it to be before. And that was the start of conversations about racism in our family, albeit though from the perspective very much of white privilege. So I'm very much aware that those kind of conversations were coming from that perspective, and that was the examination that they had. But it did have a profound effect on me and the way that I understood the world, and that was kind of one of the kind of curses, I think, that led me into my career in social work, is wanting to kind of understand more about the world and understand more about why the world functions in the way that it does, and why we have oppression, discrimination, why we have racism, why we have prejudice and marginalisation as well. So that was a kind of start of my my learning journey, and I've been on that ever since. And this is the kind of question that I'm asking myself all the time now, is around that kind of, okay, what am I going to do about these things? If I'm committed to anti-racism, what am I going to do about these things? So what support, what active support does a strong white ally provide to people, colleagues, employees and communities? And that's the challenge. What does that look like? What does that feel like? And how do I know when that's being effective or not, when it's being authentic or not, is the question that I'm asking. So again, here, I'm definitely by no means an expert in racism or in organisational development and leadership, but I do have knowledge and experience about racism through my training as a social worker and through my practice. And the information that we're going to be sharing today is based on that learning, but it's also based on the learning and knowledge of colleagues who do have lived experience, both personally and professionally, of racism, and also from BASW's position as well as a professional association organisation. So if people are interested in finding out more about allyship and the power of white allies, this is a webinar that's a helpful starting point. Again, you'll be able to access this when you get the information. I found that helpful because it's different people talking about their kind of journey with allyship, what their understanding of it is, and thinking about how they feel that they can use that power and privilege to support the anti-racism cause, not just in social work, it's got other professions as well, but I think it's a kind of helpful starting point to anyone that's thinking about their allyship journey as well, to kind of explore and examine and challenge that as well. Okay, so I'll move us on. So at the beginning, I mentioned that word kind of uncomfortable, and it is uncomfortable. It's talking about racism is uncomfortable, and as I was kind of talking to you then about my background and where I'm coming from, that is it's uncomfortable to talk about that, because I feel uncomfortable because I'm talking to you not from a perspective of lived experience, and I know that will be kind of open to challenge, but I'm fully prepared for that, and I'm willing to be open to challenge, because I think that that's necessary in order for us to move this situation forward. So I've got this slide on here because really I think when we are talking about racism and we are talking about anti-racism, it is about being uncomfortable, but it's also about being okay with that. So it's okay, it's about being comfortable talking about the uncomfortable. And I think in social work, that's something that it's not new territory to us. We are used to being having difficult conversations and being in difficult situations. So hopefully that equips us to be more ready and more open to discussing these really difficult and challenging issues. I'll just pause there for a moment. Okay. So I'll take us on just to talk a bit more about allyship, because I think it's a term that maybe there's an assumption that everybody knows what that means, or that we're hearing it a lot at the moment, and therefore we should know what it means already. So I think it's helpful to kind of share a bit more information about that. So we've got on here that being an ally means that you support and you provide support to those who are discriminated against. And you can recognise that you may not be discriminated against in the same way, or that it may not have the same impact upon you. So when I was thinking about the example that I've been giving about my experience, I can never possibly have been discriminated against in terms of the colour of my skin. But as an ally, I can support people that have experienced racism and oppression on the grounds of the colour of their skin. But I can understand discrimination from a different perspective as a woman, but I can never understand, you know, I will never have experienced, that discrimination as a result of the colour of my skin. I think the other thing to say about this statement as well here is that if people have experienced those things, that may not have the same impact as it does on somebody else, that experience may be similar or may, you know, in a lot of ways, but it might not have the same impact. And I think that's a really, really important point to think about, that everybody has a different experience of racism and everybody reacts differently to things. People can internalize what's happening. We'll talk a bit more about the impact on mental health as well, and that can cause a different response, people to behave and react differently. And there's some commonalities, but what's really, really important is that we don't make any assumptions about these things, okay? That we don't assume. And if we're thinking about allyship and being an effective ally, so supporting somebody, you know, enabling somebody to talk to us about or tell us or indicate what's happening for them, it's really important that we listen to people and listen to what people have to say, and don't make those assumptions. And don't make the assumption that everybody is going to react in the same way to things. People are not part of a homogenous group. Black and ethnic minority people are not part of a homogenous group. We're all individual human beings, and it's really important to remember that. And addressing issues of racism, diversity and inclusion is everybody's business. So it's not just up to one person, one group, one organisation. If things are going to change and we're going to tackle racism, then that has to be everybody's business. And in doing that, particularly social workers or people that are kind of working across that social care context as well, it's being aware of and actively, meaningfully challenging the structures. So it's not just thinking about that individual interaction, it's thinking about what's going on around us here, what's happening within organisations, what's happening within society, and being prepared to kind of be learning more about that. And understanding, you know, how some of the things that we do or don't do can feed into this unequal status quo, this racially unequal status quo in society. So understanding our part in that, but also what's kind of going on around us as well. I've put on there that allyship is a lifelong commitment, because for me, it's a lifelong commitment, and I know that anyone else that is committed to anti-racist practice as well will understand that it's not a question of coming to a training session, a presentation, or reading a book and saying, that's it, I've got it, I've nailed it, I know what allyship is about. It is about being prepared to continually learn and continually examine and re-examine and critically reflect on the way that we're working, the way that we're behaving, what our actions say or don't say, or our inactions say or don't say as well, and continue to demonstrate that commitment. And I've included a quote here, which I attended an anti-racist summit back in November 2020. And this is a quote that's taken from the summit. So this was somebody from a trade union representative, so somebody in the workplace, not necessarily a social worker, but somebody in the workplace, saying, Black people cannot be left to change this. We cannot change this alone. We are the oppressed. We need the help of the group that has the power, their allyship and advocacy for change. For me, I think that's a really helpful way to think about allyship, that it's about looking at the power that I have and how I can use that positively to challenge and to support as well. So one of the things that we picked up on the previous slides, and also this, is around you know, the impact of racism on people's emotional and psychological well-being. And there's a link here to an article which kind of really helps to unpick all of that, which is called Ethnic Minority Employees Face Psychological Burden of Fighting Racism at Work. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. The burden of fighting racism needs to be on the people that are not experiencing that on a daily basis, because we know that the burden of that is incredibly challenging and traumatizing for people. So this is all about us understanding more about that, more about the impact, and more about how allyship can kind of counter that and be a support to people. I think, again, just at this point, just thinking around that issue about complacency. So this is all about us kind of being alert, being aware, asking questions, helping us to explore. If there's anything that I say that people don't agree with, or want to kind of come back on, that is completely fine. I'm completely open to that. What I'm hoping to do here is just to kind of provide starting point with information and kind of thinking about my perspective as well, and the journey that I'm on personally and professionally. The other thing that I just wanted to say as well here, while we're just kind of focusing on that where we touched on there around the institutional racism and what's happening within structures and organisations within society, is that racism is a systemic problem. So it's in everything, and we all live under this system where white is placed at the highest value. And I think one of the things that I've learned through some of the kind of events, webinars and reading that I've been doing throughout my career, and more recently over the last kind of 18 months really, is something that I picked up from an article which says that the greatest lie that racism ever told was to make people believe that racism was an individual person and not a powerful system that is in the DNA of society. So again, just thinking today, we're thinking about ourselves and where we're at and our individual responsibility, but we don't just operate on our own in a vacuum. We're part of a bigger picture, and it's really, really important that we have that in mind, that we're part of these bigger systems, and what's happening when we interact with those systems, and what's happening in terms of racism in those systems as well. And we are going to explore more of that kind of in the organisational context as we move through. Okay. Again, this is just something that I wanted to share that might be helpful. It might not. Some of these images you might not be able to, they might not relate to you, or you might not connect with them, or you might think, oh, I don't agree with that, or that's not for me. I found this quite helpful in terms of getting over that first hurdle or barrier in talking to people about racism. And I mean, in my personal life as well as my professional life, I'm really thinking about how do I show that commitment all the time? And this is all about saying mistakes will be made. There'll be things that you don't know. You might try to talk to somebody about something in a particular way, and that doesn't work. It's going to be difficult and challenging. You're not going to be able to do it all on your own. You're going to need to ask for help. You might get it completely wrong, and you might have to start again with something, and it might be less than perfect. However, that's all part of this process and commitment to allyship, and that's okay. What's not okay is to be worried about all of these things and allow that to stop you from taking any action at all. So I think this is quite a helpful slide to remind us why it's important always to take that action, really. To take that action. One of the things that we kind of need to think about as well, I suppose, with anti-racism is that bit about action, that it's not just about saying what we're going to do, or it's not just about talking about it. It is about action. So, and again, another quote that I've come across through some of the research that I've been doing is, the key to doing meaningful anti-racist and allyship work and doing it well is to constantly be in a state of learning, to expect discomfort, to listen, to reflect, and to act. There is no allyship without action. So I'm hoping that this slide and some of the other material will help you to know that even if you don't know where to start, or even if you're worried about it, get going, take the action, because doing nothing is kind of perpetuating and causing the problems that, and contributing to the problems that we find ourselves in with racism today. Okay. So I'm just going to pause there, and we're going to come on to talk about George Floyd's murder, and why that's been such a catalyst for the things that we've seen over the last 12 months. I'm just going to check in the chat, because I can see a few things popping up in messages. I can't actually see the content, but I can see that there are people posting in the chat. Leanna, does anyone want to, does anybody want to ask any questions at this point, or kind of make any comments at all? Okay, I'll just check the chat and just see if I can have a quick look at that. Yeah, I'm just going to read out a couple of things. I'll not share names, but I'll just kind of read out the content here. Allyship needs to be meaningful and ongoing. It's like many things and will be an ongoing learning curve. Yes. With allyship comes the need to break through the discomfort. It's our duty as white colleagues. Action is key. Yeah. Allyship advocacy, to add to advocacy for change. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Phrase allyship is a lifelong commitment. It's my view that some individuals from white backgrounds acknowledge the problem, but those same individuals are in a position of change, are reluctant to challenge things, yeah, or to do so due to being uncomfortable. Absolutely. Or it's easier or more convenient to maintain the status quo, can be what sits underneath that. Yeah, absolutely. Race equality standard for local authorities. Yeah, we're going to come on and talk about that in terms of organisational response to racism as well, particularly in social work. Great. Okay. Talking to practitioners, social workers and residents about their experience of racism and racism is important as an ongoing dialogue. Absolutely. Having the dialogue, you know, getting the topic on the table, not allowing it to be this hidden thing that nobody talks about, is really, really important. Great, thanks to everybody that's commented so far. That's great. Yeah, working towards social justice and equality through relationships. I think white people can learn, absolutely. Yeah, great points. Thank you very much to everybody that's commented so far. Okay, so we're talking now about George Floyd's murder, which we're coming up to the 12-month anniversary in May since George Floyd was murdered. And I think I've learned a bit more about how important it is to put it in this context when we're talking about George Floyd's murder and about the murder of other Black people, not just in America, but across the globe as well. And that includes here in the UK, at the hands of police brutality or police inaction. So I wanted to include this visual here so that we can see that George Floyd's murder was very, very close to the murder of these two individuals. So Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor as well, who were both unarmed Black individuals, again in America in this case, whose deaths drew public attention and widespread outcry. So there was those incidents, and these incidents, the world has seen them because our technology now enables anyone anywhere to capture what's happening and create news, and to share that very easily with the global community through social media and other means as well. So I think as a society we're far more exposed to what is going on out there than we have been in previous decades. And there is nowhere to hide. You know, these atrocities and the murder of George Floyd have been witnessed by everybody across the world. And there was another incident as well, which people in the room may or may not be aware of, that was kind of another precursor to George Floyd's murder, and that's something that's called the Amy Cooper race grenade. And again, when you get the slides, I'll make sure that there's a link so that you can have a look at that information in more detail. Now, that incident was something that happened 24 hours before the murder of George Floyd, and that involved a woman called Amy Cooper, who was walking her dog in Central Park. She was in an area of the park where there were signs saying that, you know, the dog, if you're walking dog needs to be on a lead. She didn't have her dog on a lead, and it was in an area of the park where there's particular, you know, kind of reserved for nature, particular bird watching is that particular area. And she was challenged by someone who was bird watching in the area, a man called Christian Cooper. So they've got the same surname, but they're not related. And she was challenged to put her dog on a lead, pointing to the signs, explaining this is, you know, nature area, sensitive to nature, you need to put your dog on a lead. She refused. The conversation continued, and then Christian Cooper began to film the conversation. So they stood, they're not stood close to each other, they kind of stood apart. He's filming. Amy Cooper is a white woman, and Christian Cooper is a black man. And Amy Cooper, partly through this exchange, starts to exclaim that he is being aggressive towards her. She feels threatened. She's going to ring the police. And what she actually says, and is captured on film, she states that she's going to ring the police and tell them, or the cops, it's America, I'm going to call the cops, tell them that there's an African-American man who is threatening me with my life, which is absolutely, completely untrue. They're having a verbal exchange, stood far apart, but she did that knowing what her white privilege, the reaction that her white privilege would gain from the police and what would happen as a result of that. And that incident and the footage from that went viral. There was outcry from the Black community, again globally, and then very shortly afterwards, a day later, we would sadly witness the murder of George Floyd. And the impact of that has been felt across the world. George Floyd's words, his last words as he was murdered, will haunt us forever. "I can't breathe," he said. As the minutes passed by, George reverted to a system of hierarchy to appease the killers, so to appease the police. He began to use language such as "sir," addressing those who were harming him as if they were his superiors. So this interaction, along with the one that I've just described, involving Amy Cooper, speak volumes about institutional racism, both in America and on a global scale as well. And it just shows that no matter what the kind of platitudes that we learn about equality and diversity at school or in the workplace, it's clear that not everybody begins the marathon of life on the same footing. While some people with privilege race forward in streamlined running shoes, unaware of that privilege that's lurching them forward, other people are glued firmly to the starting line. So ethnicity, class, disability, or gender impact on people's progress from the first millisecond of that race, so the race of life, and few, no matter how hard they work, can realistically close that gap. Events such as the murder of George Floyd, as well as individual experiences of racism, can negatively impact on people's mental health, their work performance, and their ability to participate in their community, their family life, in everything. We need to be aware of this, and we need to provide support when needed. We also need to be clear that institutional racism is something that exists. And again, recent events with the particular Sewell report would suggest that, that's not the case in this country, but we know from these events and what continues to happen that that is the case. I'm going to talk a bit more now about that and about other events that were happening in terms of Black Lives Matter. So as we were saying, that George's murder, and it's not George's death, which we've got on this slide as well. If we're talking about George's death, what we're saying that that's a dilution of what occurred. It wasn't a death, it was murder, and that's currently being looked at through the American court system, as well as we speak at the moment during this presentation. That's happening. So this is a murder that is in a long line of atrocities and brutalities that are endured by the global Black community. And this has a long history, and sometimes that history is longer than for some of us it's convenient to honestly acknowledge. George was brutally murdered by a police officer, and the world has seen the evidence. Context to George's murder is emotive and cumulative, so it's a build-up. We talked about the Amy Cooper race grenade incident as well. There are endless examples of police brutality, both here in the UK and in the US and across the globe. And these modern day systems of oppression and the historic and ongoing suppression of the effects of slavery and colonialism in mainstream education are examples of the things that are accumulating and building up to our lack of acknowledgement and understanding about that context. So the images on this slide here, we've got the image of George Floyd. We've then got the image of 2 females at the Black Lives Matter protest last year, which is quite a powerful image. And then we've got another image here, which is taken from one of the protests that was happening in London in June last year, and people may have seen that image. So that was a peaceful demonstration that turned not peaceful. It was infiltrated by a far-right group, and that image is Patrick Hutchinson, is the black man there carrying out a protester, someone that had infiltrated the protest, who's a white man who's later revealed to be a member of a far-right group. So that image, again, is one that's gone global, just showing, the situation really, and that is an incredibly powerful image in terms of what that says about those protests and about life itself and about humanity. And I think the issues around the protests with the infiltration are things that have been seen across the globe, and again, it's been a continual thing, I think, throughout the Black Lives Matter movement, is that constant infiltration and looking to change the narrative, particularly through the media. So what we've seen on television has been examples of looting, examples of violence, when those protests were actually peaceful, and there's no mention of looting that went on in terms of Africa and the natural resources there by colonialism and through the slavery. So it's interesting to see how everything was kind of portrayed through the media, and I'm sure people will have their own views and experiences about that. Okay. So what's been happening in response? So I wanted to share with you a bit about action that's been taken by BASW as an organisation, and then to talk a bit more about how that feeds into what's been happening nationally and what might be happening in the organisations that you work with as well. So our organisation has an equality, diversity and inclusion group, again, which has been set up in response to the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, as a challenge to us as an organisation around what we're doing, not just about racism as an issue, but about discrimination and oppression as a whole, and how are we looking at that as an organisation, and where's our commitment to that. So we have set up that group. And again, if anyone's interested in having a look at that, that might be something that you're thinking about with the organisation that you work within. Do we have one of those groups? What's our commitment? And the position statement that's developed around that group, again, is quite an honest admission of where we're lacking, where we're falling short of things, and what our commitment is going forward. So if you want ideas of what to kind of think about within your own organisations, that might be a good place to start. There was lots of activity on social media, which I haven't kind of captured on here, and particularly Wayne was instrumental in putting out, an incredibly honest but challenging tweet to the sector, to our social work sector, social care sector as well, around, what's our leadership doing here? Where's our leadership's response to what's happening, to these global atrocities that we can all see unfolding? Each and every day, where's our leadership response? And it was fair to say that I think at first that was met with some deafening silence, which was then interpreted, and then slowly organisations started to respond, and there's been variable response in terms of what those responses tell us, whether they're kind of what we call lukewarm, whether they're just things that are kind of platitudes that say the right things, but there isn't kind of any action and meaning underneath, or whether people just didn't acknowledge that they needed to say something was an issue as well. So there's lots of stuff going on social media at that time. Some of you may or may not have seen that, but this is one particular aspect of campaigning that's ongoing that I wanted to kind of highlight to you, which is the KCMG medal campaign. And again, in the chat, if you want to post in here, if any of you have heard of this already, or what your thoughts are about this as I give you the information. And this is incredibly difficult information to hear, I think, about this campaign and what it consists of. But I think it's an important one to draw our attention to, and I'll explain why in terms of my own perspective as well. So this medal, and you can see it, it's the image at the in the top of the slide here. So the KCMG medal, it's awarded by the Queen, so it's part of the honours system, and it's still in existence now. And basically it can be awarded, or it's traditionally been awarded, for service abroad, so to ambassadors, diplomats, senior foreign officials that might have been doing work for the UK abroad. So it's awarded by the Queen, it's still in existence today. And I'm not sure if you can see the imagery on there, but I'll describe it to you. So the image on this medal is one of a white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed angel standing on the neck of a black man who is in chains. And quite rightly, once this medal was identified and people's attention was drawn to it, campaigners have clearly said that that image is reminiscent of the images that we've seen of George Floyd's murder, and that's kind of prompted the campaigning and petition activity that we've been involved with and that Wayne's initiated at BASW. So there's a petition to have this medal removed from the honours system and replaced with something that has more positive imagery around diversity and the kind of inclusive society that we are championing for, that we want to exist, and that truly represents our diverse population in the UK. So initially there's a petition, there's an open letter to the Queen, and again, I don't know whether people know about this or have seen the medal or seen any of the campaign activity. Please feel free to post in the chat anything that you might want to say in response to this. But so this was back in July, bear in mind. So the open letter went to the Queen. There were over 2,000 signatures on that letter. And I think we got back a holding letter or one to say, you know, oh, it'd gone to the wrong department or we needed to do something else. We then didn't hear anything. And then we got something on the 15th of October. So bear in mind here, we're asking for the award to be changed, we're asking for new icons, and we're not just asking for this award, we're asking for the whole honours system to be re-looked at to ensure that, and including statues as well, so not just the honours system, any kind of historical kind of objects or symbols or things that are part of that kind of colonial history to be re-examined and re-looked at, and to be changed, to have new icons that better represent the true spirit of equality and diversity and justice as well. On the 15th of October, we received a response from Buckingham Palace asking us to direct our appeal to the Honours and Decorations Committee at the Cabinet Office. That's happened, that was back in October, we're now in April, and we haven't had any further response to that. So that medal is still in existence, it can still be awarded, and it's still, and people have been awarded that medal, and that remains a campaign area for us, but there remains no action having been taken through the Honours and Decorations Committee to date. So it'd be interesting to kind of hear what people think about that, or any comments that people have. From my perspective, I had no idea that medal existed. I had no idea at all, and when I was made aware of the campaign, I was shocked, angry, outraged, and then ashamed that I know so little potentially about the whole honours system. I think I know the basics, but I think, why am I not educated myself? Why didn't I know that was in existence? Why don't I know more about our honours system, or how that operates, or, you know, why aren't as a social worker, why aren't I challenging that, or why am I not doing more about that? So for me, you know, that definitely came shame that I wasn't aware of that, and that I know so little about that part of history that is still in existence within our society. So that has been another kind of challenge for me, really, to educate myself more about the honour system and to work actively to challenge and to deconstruct things that are in our society that have that representation, that, you know, that are part of this system that's kind of reinforcing racism in everyday life. So I'm just going to pause and I'm just going to check the chat, and I don't know whether anybody wants to come in verbally and kind of make any comments at all on that. Please feel free if you do.
Yeah, I just want to encourage a few people from the chat as well to participate. I think there were some really good comments there.
Oh yes,
just we were reflecting a little bit on that video of Amy Cooper,
yeah,
and Rosemary. I think they were saying.
Yeah. I'll go back to that, Leona. Shall I? Yeah, that's
okay. Yeah, if you wish.
Yeah. So, taking us back to what we were discussing in terms of the last kind of 12 months events. You've put a comment earlier on about the Macpherson report with the 70 recommendations to the police talking about institutional racism following the murder of Stephen Lawrence. Yeah, this young boy was killed before he came to the country. Yep. Oh, sorry, it's just flicked up there.
Yeah, sorry, I've got lots of comments there. You can skip over them.
Yeah, the history of racism. Yeah, we should be familiarising ourselves, absolutely, to ensure we challenge it wherever we go. And I think for me, I know the honour system's in existence. Obviously, I know that, but I have no idea. And I know about things like CBE and OBE and MBE. I have no idea about the imagery on medals, for example, or what medals are still in existence, or how that's even come to be in existence, that image, and just you know, and then what else is, like, say to me, what else is going on here that I don't know about? I suppose that's how it's left me kind of feeling. What else don't I know about? What do I need to get to know about?
Can I just say,
yes,
it's Mavita here from Havering. I think some of the important things though are, you know, no one knows everything, but it's about what you do when you do know.
Yes.
It's about actually, if something comes to your attention or if you're made aware of something, it's then what do? Do you keep silent, or do you actually proactively move forward and you do something about it? So I think it's those sort of things actually, because I don't think everybody knows everything, but it is that bit about once it becomes in part of your conscious understanding or beliefs, or you know, whether you've read, whether you've seen, whatever, it's about then actually how you move that forward.
Yeah, thanks, Mavita. Yeah, really, really important point. Yes, and I suppose I was just kind of saying, you know, my kind of initial sort of very immediate reactions to these things, you know, from that kind of honest perspective. But absolutely, it's what have I done since about that? Well, I've signed the petition, signed the letter, and I've encouraged anyone that I meet or come across, or anyone that I deliver the presentation to have a look at that campaign activity and to support that. I regularly send out details of that petitioning campaign to my email contact list, and then I have made it my business to start finding out more about the honours system and what forms part of that and what we can do to take action. And I suppose one of the most kind of visible campaign activities that we've seen in terms of statues over the last 12 months has been, you know, the Colston statue that was taken down in Bristol, and understanding more about that campaigning activity, and knowing that there is you know, there's a group of activists up and down the country who have been campaigning to have statues taken down, and other, you know, more inclusive statues to replace them that represent the society that we live in and want to celebrate today. And again, that was something that I've got a vague idea about, but probably not the knowledge that I have now. And again, that's something I'm always willing to kind of talk to people about, and that I share in my personal life as well, and encourage people to find out more about that, and more about our history, and more about what we need to do to kind of challenge that as well. So thank you for that. We're just talking about the Amy Cooper incident here in the chat. Amy Cooper was sacked from her job, if I remember correctly, when people saw the hideous video of her racism. Yes, that's right. She was, she was sacked for her employment. There's also a video online that you'll easily be able to access, which is of Patrick Cooper kind of talking about the incident and how he saw that from his perspective, and kind of talking more about that, you know, the kind of institutional racism and why and how that incident represents that. Another comment here, Mary Cooper is one of many who used their white privilege against Black people. Yes, just going to move us down. Education about other people in relation to understanding their ethnic background will go a long way in reducing racism. Some people are racist because they grew up in a society where racism is the norm. Absolutely, education is key. That's what we're all doing here today, education, learning, and thinking about that. I saw an interesting infographic the other day, which was kind of showing from birth around when ideas can start to permeate and when children might start to develop kind of racist ideas about things. And it's quite shocking, actually. It's at a really, really young age, and kind of picking up different kind of things, which I'll share that on the email actually after this presentation with you, so that you can have a look at that. Kind of illustrates that point. Racism is a system of unequal rules. Until equal access is obtained, nothing will change. So systemic racism, yeah, absolutely. Shocking to see the video. Yep, and the apartheid regime in South Africa was such a system. You remember my mother going to work and being reprimanded for merely greeting a person of colour. Little did they know about our friendships and relationships with people. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say on that point, I think, you know, through the relationships with each other, we have so much to learn. Like the Amy Cooper thing I discussed with friends of mine who are a mixed couple. And I remember after the Black Lives Matter incident as well, some colleagues, Black colleagues, called me, and I was so struck by their experience. You know, they were saying, we fear for our family, we fear for our children, you know, we're expecting the police to protect us, and we would be horrified, of course, if something like this happened in the UK. And that really struck me, and I kind of got it on another level, is all I wanted to say. So, you know, I just want to kind of encourage people to share experiences with each other, because as a person, you know, who is white, we have limited experience of many issues, and unless it's highlighted to us, or unless you're kind of awake and your antennae is there to kind of pick up on the issues. My antenna, I would like to think, is quite developed because of the you know, the terrible history of my country of origin, and some of the experiences that that I have witnessed and know about. I think that's one of the things I just want to say, that we set up a BLM MS Teams group locally in our local authority, and people post all sorts of things there, and it's really fascinating to see. I mean, one of the like beautiful videos I saw was about hair love. I don't know if people saw that Oscar-winning clip, but it, you know, it was a story about Black hair and people's identities. And I think certainly these are the kind of stories, plus of course the terrible things that we need to know about, and how it impacts our lives, and how we can make a difference as an ally, working with and being with our colleagues, and really standing with them against racism and having a zero tolerance approach to it. Is just to say that I think through those relationships, things can really change. I think people kind of, you know, think differently, and they behave differently, and they respond differently. So, you know, it was good that you shared that clip. I think about, you know, talking about racism is uncomfortable for many people, but we need to break through that discomfort. That's all I wanted to add.
Thanks, Liana. That's a really valuable contribution and reflections there on your experience, and also kind of, you know, personally and in the workplace as well. Yeah, we've got, that's it. It's up to all of us to kind of find that way through, and particularly you know, white people and people striving for allyship. You know, we can't just continue to be silent on this, and particularly as a profession, I think, you know, we've got, you know, as part of our kind of professional responsibility, whether we're a qualified social worker or working in a social care or health or whatever context it is, if we're working with people and families, you know, we need to find ways to, you know, be opening up these conversations and enabling people to feel safe and supported in the services that we're offering to people. So it cuts through absolutely everything. And just on that point about sharing stories and experiences, on this slide you'll see Outlanders, which is a recently published book collection of stories from social workers, and the title is it's social workers, it's Black and other global majority communities, so it's social workers from across global Black majority communities, and it's called Hidden Narratives, Outlanders, Hidden Narratives from Social Workers of Colour. And the contributions within that collection are, well, it's absolutely, I'll describe it as one of the most beautiful but also challenging publications for social workers as well, because that is experiences, people sharing their experiences of racism, but also, yeah, strategies and things that have resonated with people, or that people have been left with, or that people have connected with. And that is, it's a new publication. Again, Wayne was very much instrumental in that with Siobhan McLean, that they've edited that publication, and it's pretty groundbreaking, I think, for our profession as well. So I would encourage people to have a look at that, and again, because of the different perspectives, but also bringing all of that together, it's a huge, rich resource and beautiful thing to have that collection of people's experiences together for us all to be able to learn and to open up those conversations as well around race and racism, and re-emphasizes just how important it is that we do that as social workers as well. So I'm just going to have a quick look down the chat. Things won't change. What has happened and the impacts that's had on individuals, no, but we need to be looking at what we can do differently from the future, because what we've been doing previously has not been effective, and it hasn't worked, and to an extent it's compounded the situation we find ourselves in, I think. Leanna, you've made reference to Benjamin Zephaniah's poem when he was offered the OBE. Yes, again, I think that's probably available to watch on YouTube, actually, if people want to take the time to do that. Just have a look here. Big business and banks that have been around for years are built on, yeah, compensation from government for losing slaves, and slavery was abolished. Yes, absolutely, as are, yeah, many institutions as well. Interesting documentary. Sorry, I'm not very good at managing the chat. It's bobbling all over the place. Let's have a look here. Interesting documentary about it. Yeah, great. If people can share links, that's great as well. Systemic racism is deep-rooted, is well and deep-rooted, and it's been overlooked because those in power have not allowed it to be seen. Completely agree with Vita said. Yep, great. Yeah, so systemic racism is real, apologies. Okay, and then we've got some new messages here. Great, someone's, oh, thanks, Liana, you've posted the Outlanders link, that's brilliant.
Yes, I found that, and I think Peggy was just talking about, well, the very recent developments, I guess, in the media, yes, around the Queen and Harry's children,
yes,
and all the discussion about skin color.
Yeah.
So we've got a long way to go there, I think.
We have got a long way to go. We have. Yeah, and I think as well the way, yeah, the kind of media coverage, certainly a lot of the kind of discussion that I heard afterwards on the radio about the programme, and about you know, the information that was shared to the programme as well, just left me feeling really just really concerned, really worried about how we're talking about you know, those issues in the media as well. And there's a really good again, I don't know whether people are into podcasts. There's a series called I think it's, yeah, Social Matters podcast, and it's 3 social workers that kind of get together and talk about different issues, and it's quite an informal style, but they do an anti-racism one where Wayne features, but there's another one that I listened to the other day around microaggressions, which they touch on the situation and the interview with Oprah, Meghan and Harry, and kind of the implications of that, and particularly thinking about microaggressions and then that kind of media coverage. And that's quite a good podcast to kind of just think about everyday interactions, and then kind of what's going on in the media, and how that permeates and how that's reflected in the conversations that are happening around these issues as well. So yeah, that's another kind of good resource.
I think also there, Connie, I think was talking about, I think it was Connie who was talking about, just being a human being to one another.
Oh, that's it. Human. Yes.
That's the key thing, isn't it? Treat other people as you want to be treated. So I was saying it was making me think of a Nina Simone song. I did listen to Nina Simone way before she was kind of popular, is all I want to say.
Yes.
Belinda Berry was making a really important point there, which was around covert racism and how that's dealt with.
Yeah,
and again, I just think professionally, it certainly was interesting for me coming from South Africa, where people were so openly very racist towards one another. And I remember being quite shocked when some of my Black colleagues were relaying some of the stories that their children were experiencing in school. And, I kind of arrived in the UK thinking racism was dead because I had a Black manager since the day I arrived. And I was like, yay, this place is kind of all for diversity. And then, of course, being in the system longer, I realized that this is what was happening, is there's a lot of covert racism. So Belinda's making reference to that in workplaces and how difficult it is to evidence when this is occurring. And that's the thing, isn't it? Racism is something often I think that you can feel, and sometimes it's not always tangible, and getting the evidence together that is actually what is going on in the workplace is quite a challenge. But hopefully we've gotten better in terms of supporting and advocating for people. And I think what Black Lives Matter has done is it's really kind of put things on the table, and perhaps enabled some of those important discussions that have always been very necessary.
Yeah, thanks, Leanna, and thanks, Belinda, and everyone else that's commenting in the chat. Yeah, covert racism, absolutely, and particularly in the workplace. And the problem with the systems that we've got are that it's very much the onus is on the individual who's experiencing that to gather the evidence and present that quite often to people that are not acknowledging that there is racism in that environment, as you've just been saying there, Leanna. So there's a huge kind of way to go where that's concerned, but I do think that's kind of where the allyship kind of role needs to come in as well, in terms of that being alert and being aware. And that's a huge challenge, particularly working through the pandemic when we might not be working together in teams all together anymore, and we're working remotely, and we might not be in that space with people. But I think it's important that we reach out and we say, we make it clear that we're there and we're listening and we want to support. And I think the challenge for organisations actually, and this would be something to think about as well for people here, is what is your organisation's policy around racism? Does it have one? Do you know where it is stored? Do you know what it says? Is it, and how far does that go, I suppose, in protecting individual employees, both with racism that might be experienced in the line of work, so outside when we're working with people, families and communities, but then also, as we've just been discussing, in the workplace. And that's only part of it, and we're going to come on to talk about that kind of workforce and workplace issues shortly. But I'm just conscious as well that we're at 3 p.m. and people potentially want to, we said we'd have a break now, so I'm just going to check Are people happy to take 10 minutes now, comfort break, and then we can pick up on things when we come back? I'm just going to have a quick look in the chat as well. Yeah, there's some information in the chat that's helpful about social experiments. Let's have a look. Oh yeah, Little Fires Everywhere with Kerry Washington and Reese Witherspoon, good series. So some great suggestions on here of things to kind of educate ourselves with as well. So brilliant, that's great. Okay, is everybody happy if we kind of take a break now, and then we come back at 3:10 and we continue, if that's okay?
So shall I just say welcome back, everybody, after our comfort break. We've got Liz here with us, so we're continuing the session and her slides, I think. Thanks, Liz.
Oh, thanks, Liana, and thanks, everybody. I was just catching up on some of the things in the chat as well, because it was jumping about when I was trying to look at it before, so I managed to catch up on that. So the hazards of technology, but yeah, Liana, thank you, because you've been really helpful with kind of pointing out some of the kind of key discussion points on there, so that's really helpful. Thank you, and thank you for some very insightful reflections in the first half of our presentation. I've also noted down that you've put about Jane Elliott and some videos, which I haven't seen those, so I've got those on my list now. So thank you for that. always learning, and great to share resources. And I'll make sure that I share some additional ones with yourselves via email as well that you can use as well. Brilliant. So what I'm going to do is take us back into the slides now. We'll just go back into where we were. Just also wanted to point out on here, this is a slide that we were looking at just before the break. There's a number of different articles that anyone again that follows Wayne has written. We've got some from our other colleagues across the organisation as well around allyship, and we've also got how to promote an anti-racist culture in social work, which is an online article that you'll be able to access, and various other resources that we've got available through BASW. Excuse me, as well. So I'll make sure that you get the links to those. So just going to take us on to, oops, are we on the right one? Yes, we are. Okay, so just going to talk a little bit about Black Lives Matter, really. And the reason that I've included this slide here is particularly around some of the challenges that you may get when you're talking about Black Lives Matter. And I think hopefully over the last 12 months, we've been able to kind of dispel some of these myths, or kind of be able to counter some of the conversations that you'll hear about, well, what about all lives? All lives matter. What about white lives? Don't white lives matter? And I think it's helpful to kind of have something in the armory that you can kind of, you can come back with that can help you to open up that conversation and can help to kind of readdress those sorts of comments and where they might be coming from. The visual image that's on the screen, I think, is really powerful. So if we look at that first, so that's what some people think Black Lives Matter means. Some people think it means Black lives needing to matter more than others. Actually,
Yes.
what we're talking about, yes.
Sorry to cut in, you're not sharing your screen? It's still...
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. That's terrible. Let me just come back in.
That's what I'll tell you now before.
Yeah, no, definitely. I don't know what's happened there because I did press that. Sorry. That's my Zoom lack of knowledge again. There we go. Sorry, thanks for that, Charles. Apologies. Hopefully everybody can see that now. Yeah, thanks for that. Right, hopefully that's okay. Can you see that now?
Yeah.
So this was yeah, great stuff. Okay, apologies for that. So this is the image that I was just referring to there around Black Lives Matter. So this might be the retort or comment that you might hear when you're talking about Black Lives Matter to people. And some people can think, and I think this image really helpfully explains it. So some people will say that they think that when we're talking about Black Lives Matter, that means Black lives needing to matter more than anybody else's. What we're actually talking about is what the image shows at the bottom of the screen here. We're talking about Black lives needing to matter as on an equal par with everybody's, okay? But that we're not at that point yet. because we're not on that equal plane. We're not there. We're needing to do the work to get there, but that's what Black Lives Matter is talking about. So in the description here, there's other examples of how you might respond to those calls for white or all lives matter. So we're saying here that that's not comparable or relevant. It's like asking, what about colon cancer during a discussion about breast cancer? Or advising a bereaved mother that all lives matter at her child's funeral. Or save the whales does not mean that other sea life is unimportant. White lives have always mattered, so to keep proclaiming that white lives matter adds excessive value to them, tilting us further towards white supremacy. So this is all about Black lives needing to matter more than they have, and about society apportioning Black lives equal weighting. And Black Lives Matter has its critics. People may know about that, but we're not clear why that is. We see this as a movement that is about promoting equality, and quite often it can have its critics by people who vehemently claim that they're not a racist, but will then say, you know, why have we got Black Lives Matter? Isn't it about all or white lives mattering? So I think having something like this, having that visual and some ways to kind of come back on that can be quite helpful in kind of that sort of challenging conversation, really. Okay. So we've talked about allyship, and I've kind of given the perspective on that, kind of talking about racism. And I think it's important for us to kind of clarify here as well what we're talking about with anti-racism. So what do we mean by anti-racism? What is it? And this is from Ibrahim Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Some of you may be familiar with this book. It's quite a seminal text in kind of anti-racist education and learning. And there's a really good video clip that I'll share with you as well, around like a really 8-minute clip of him talking around why the education system is institutionally racist. That's really, really helpful, again, to kind of be thinking about these concepts and where we're at and where society's at, and some of the commentary that's come out following the Sewell report from the government around the fact that the UK isn't institutionally racist. And there's some quite good counter to that in his kind of video. But this is the kind of text to be having a look at. If you're not familiar with that, I would recommend having a look at this. So within that, the definition of anti-racism here is, so anti-racism is a belief that all races and ethnic groups are equal and deserving of the same opportunities. But the most important part of anti-racism is the next step, which is to do something about the existing inequality. Okay, so thinking about that image that we've just seen, that we're not starting out on the same footing here. There's an inequality that's already there, and to get to that point of equality, we've got to do something about that. Anti-racism is the active dismantling of systems, privileges, and everyday practices that reinforce and normalise the contemporary dimensions of white dominance. This, of course, also involves a critical understanding of the history of whiteness. Again, I'm just going to pause there. And there's a really great webinar. Again, I'll share the link, which came up from the Tavistock and Portman Institute last summer, which captures the history of whiteness and kind of from a particular kind of psychological perspective, kind of examines it. It's a really, really good webinar, and it kind of looks into all our kind of structures in society. It covers some of that information that we were talking about earlier about children and at what age do they start to kind of pick up ideas, and where do they come from, and how, you know, how do they learn about racism, and some really, really, really great stuff in there. So I'll share that afterwards, and it really kind of deconstructs and unpicks what we're talking about here with whiteness, how that kind of permeates all the different kind of structures within society, all the different kind of levels that exists, and how without being conscious of this, that we can be contributing to that all of the time. So I think that if people are interested in learning more about that kind of concept, that's a really good place to start with that webinar. So I'll share that. And some of you may have caught that webinar yourself. It was on, I think it was on over the summer. Yeah, I think kind of the summer months. So yeah, very interesting. Move us on here. So thinking about what anti-racism is, it's about deconstructing, it's about recognizing that we're not all starting on equal footing, it's about challenge, it's about doing something. Okay, so what does the kind of professional standards, or what do our kind of the structures around social work tell us about how we should be behaving as social workers in terms of anti-racist practice? So what do our institutions tell us, and what do our codes, what do our standards, what do our guidance tell us? So we've got here Social Work England's professional standards, and this is what we've got currently. This is what we're required to meet in terms of our professional registration if we're a social worker and we want to remain on the register practicing as a social worker and using that title. This is what our professional standards tell us about anti-racism and about racism. So we've got there 1.5, 1.6, 5.1, 6.1. So within there, we can see that the word racism isn't mentioned at all, nor is anti-racism. We've got different words in there. We've got promote social justice, which we talked about. We've got inequality. We've got challenging disadvantage, understand the impact of disadvantage and discrimination. We've got discrimination again there. And we've got abusive, or discriminatory behaviour or practice. But what we haven't got there is any mention of racism specifically, or any mention about anti-racism specifically. So that's something, I suppose, that as a profession, we need to have a think about, really. And I know that BASW as an organisation, we're kind of asking for those standards to go out to be revised and to go out to consultation again, so that they better reflect that commitment to anti-racism, because we think that implying it isn't enough. It needs to be explicit, and particularly around accountability, both for us as professionals, but also to the public as well. So that's something that we're challenging at the moment. It'd be interesting again to have any, hear any comments on that or thoughts on that. So that's what we're working to at the moment. We've also got the Code of Ethics, which again, when we take a look at those, the Code of Ethics kind of underpins, that's our sort of bedrock in terms of social work practice. That's where we go to, that's where we look when we're having ethical dilemmas or challenges within our practice. That's our kind of guide that keeps our practice safe. Again, there needs to be more reference within there to our commitment to anti-racism and to talk about racism and how we should be responding with that zero tolerance, but also what we can expect in terms of our response as a profession there. There are different position statements, certainly from our organisation and others, about promoting anti-racism in social work, or how we challenge racism, or maybe more around anti-discriminatory and anti-oppressive practice than using the terminology of anti-racism. We've got mentions of anti-oppressive practice, anti-discriminatory practice, certainly in our Code of Ethics. But we're talking about having anti-racist practice very clearly rooted within that. There's other documents here that kind of talk about racism and can kind of help us to understand more about what's going on in our workplaces. So that one, Confronting the White Elephant, White Privilege in Social Services, Cultural Competence and Social Work Practice, and Decolonising Social Work Education and Policy. And there's various campaign activity to decolonise social work education, so asking universities and other education institutions to re-examine their kind of teaching materials, their reading lists, their learning resources, and ask that question about how representative of Black authors in the profession are these texts. If we're talking about being anti-racist, then we need to start there with learning more from our Black and ethnic minority social workers who are contributing to the profession, about those perspectives, and to have that, you know, as part of the learning and education that we have as social workers, not just in terms of qualifying, but also in terms of our post-qualification landscape as well. But anti-racism isn't mentioned in the practice educator standards, practice supervisors, or in the education and training standards for qualification for social work either. So I think that says a lot about where we're at in terms of our learning, development and education as social workers, and where the road that we've got to travel to kind of address that, really. Okay. So following on from that, I suppose this side here kind of, I suppose, sort of consolidates some of that. So in thinking about where we are at. So anti-racism in social work must be fully considered and dismantled through collaboration with Black and ethnic minority social workers in roles as experts with both personal and professional lived experience. This is the only way that Black and ethnic minority social workers' basic needs can be properly met and their wide-ranging experience fully utilised. Of course, this approach can only improve the experiences of people from Black and ethnic minority communities in relation to social care as well. So it really is just a question of how much of a priority is anti-racism in social work. Okay. So thinking more about that, so about where we're at in social work, and also where we're at in society in terms of kind of our commitment, really. So this really, I suppose, kind of consolidates what we've been talking about in the first half of the presentation, and kind of, you know, thinking about, well, yeah, okay, anti-racism, so what are we going to do about that? That can often be the kind of response to things, and we've got that here, anti-racism, yeah, blah, 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 yawn. So we've got some strong wording here, and this slide was put together by Wayne Reed. So, is the news of police officers taking selfies beside the bodies of 2 murdered Black sisters, the recent far-right violent protests in London, or the racist comments by Suffolk councillors does not outrage or alert you to the fact that racism is thriving in our country right now, then you really must consider whether you've sleepwalked into being an opponent of anti-racism. At the very least, we must be self-aware and honest with ourselves and others when our boredom threshold is reached. This can be subliminal and counterproductive to anti-racism at every level. Everyday microaggressions, which can include banter in the workplace, can fuel violent racist incidents. We've got a graphic that shows kind of that in more detail further on in the presentation, around how things like microaggressions, so thinking about that can be verbal, so it mentions banter there, it can be through behaviour, environmental indignities, things that are unintentional, but that communicate that kind of hostile, you're not welcome, or derogatory kind of comments about groups of people, or negative racial insults. And we had some examples came through in the chat earlier around how that might manifest with this kind of covert racism in workplaces, how that can then lead to and fuel violent racist incidents. So again, we think in a multifaceted racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. It's not enough to say I'm not racist, all the things I say aren't racist. We must be anti-racist, and that involves action. So again, thinking about the allyship role, being an ally doesn't necessarily mean you fully understand what it feels like to be oppressed, but it does mean that you are taking and you're prepared to take on that struggle as your own. The burden of ending racism should not be on those who are subjected to it, but on those who uphold and those who benefit from it. And this comment here, and thinking again about what we were saying about you know, the murder of George Floyd and other Black people across the globe that we've seen through police brutality and through other means that demonstrate that racism is in existence and is happening. This comment here from Will Smith: racism isn't getting worse, it's getting filmed. So our exposure to it, there's nowhere for us to hide, it's there, we're being shown it, what are we doing about it? Okay, so just before I come on to talk about workforce inequalities there, I'm just going to just check the chat and ask if anybody, how people are feeling, if everybody's okay, if people want to make any comments at all, or if there's anything in the chat. So let me just find the chat again. It seems to have disappeared. Liana, I wonder if you wouldn't mind helping me. I've just lost the chat temporarily there for a second. Let me just see if I can pop it back up.
Sorry, I'm just having real crazy difficulties with Zoom here. I was just going to invite people and just to ask as well, perhaps what the view is in our communities. I kind of want to ask what the vibe is. And if people wouldn't mind sharing that. I mean, I remember when I first came to Barking and Dagenham, it was a very interesting environment. At the time, my partner actually gave me a key, one of his personal alarms, and he said to me, "You're going into BNP Valley now, so stick this on your key ring, in case you land into difficulties," because it was so British National Party led in Barking and Dagenham at the time, and it was a really scary environment to walk around with, and even for me, who was white at the time. I mean, I would be okay if I sat on a bus and didn't open my mouth, but the minute I opened my mouth, people would know I was a foreigner, and that would cause some difficulties. So I'm just curious because, as you're pointing out these things, as we think about the history of our local communities, and obviously we're here from a lot of Northeast London boroughs. So I'm just wondering how we're feeling in our community. I mean, 2/3 of our people now are Black and ethnic minorities in Barking and Dagenham. So things have changed a lot. I think I've been in the country 20 years, but certainly, when I was initially working in Barking and Dagenham many years ago in children's services, I was very brave. It was 2009. So I think things have changed quite dramatically there. I think, the council also played quite a large part in trying to curb the influence of the British National Party locally. But I'm just kind of wondering what other people's views are. So while people have a think about that, I think we had our break, and then Charles was reminding us to have a chat on Twitter on the Northeast London Teaching Partnership events and pages there, encouraging us to use hashtag anti-racist social work. We do need more chatters on that page, I think, to liven up our community there. So Sidonie was saying that we were commenting on the images of BASW, saying that the images make it nice and clear, and we had to kind of explain, I think, to a lot of people who didn't kind of understand the Black Lives Matter movement, what it was all about. So I think, Sidonie, I don't know if you want to say anything, but you were saying there you heard the retort from so many others. I tried to post something there about Jane Elliott. It's not the best clip in the world, but she kind of highlights really, what a lot of white people kind of don't get about what racism may feel like in her experiment about brown eye, blue eye, puts people in two cohorts, which is quite interesting there. So, and Rachel, I don't know if you wanted to say something about Hillingdon, but please do participate in our conversations. I feel very dominant here, and that shouldn't be the case.
Thanks, Liana. Yeah, please feel free, anybody, to contribute at all. It's completely open for you to do so. Anything that Liana's saying there about, how things are feeling in your communities in terms of the work you're doing. Have you noticed a change, a shift, or anything like that? Please feel free to share that.
I just wanted to kind of add on to what I think it's Liana said when you were explaining what the context or the words Black Lives Matter means, because a lot of individuals, I've heard it so many times, who are of white background say all lives matter. To us, that's not what it's about. So I thought that slide explained it beautifully in terms of what it truly means. And earlier on in the presentation where you made reference to, I think it was a medal, you were saying something, yeah? And I wrote a sentence where I pretty much said it's not surprising because unfortunately, as it stands, when it comes to anything, let's just use work, for example. I believe that people should be hired based on their qualification, their experience, and what they can bring to the organization. A lot of times, I'm sure you're going to cover this in this slide anyway, but I was referring to that. I didn't get a chance because there's a lot of things that were being typed, and it wouldn't flow because I would say something and then somebody else types something, and then you just get this random sentence after. But what I wanted to add,
so there, thank you for speaking up. That's fine. Thank you.
So what I wanted to add was that individuals should be hired on merit, not just because of whom you know, because sometimes the person that you know could probably do a good job and equally qualified, that's fine. But if they're not, then that's where it becomes an issue.
Thank you. No, thank you. And both points that you've made there, thank you for that. And yeah, it is interesting what you said about the medal, not surprising. And that, again, that's made me stop and think that's, that we're in a sad state of affairs, aren't we, where that kind of imagery is to be expected. And that just shows, again, the work that we've got to do. And your references there to kind of recruitment, I think it's actually more than that. I think it's about, we need to stop recruiting on the basis that somebody looks like us as well. So thinking about, when we're starting to look at the makeup of organizations and who's in which roles, and particularly around leadership roles, and thinking, does our leadership reflect the diversity of our community that we serve, or does it reflect the diversity within the organization? And we know in social work, and that's what we're going to come on to talk about now, particularly around, that we've got above average representation of Black and minority ethnic social workers, both in children's and adult social work at a grassroots level. Okay, good. Okay, that's positive. But that then doesn't translate the further up the organisation that we go. So something's happening there in organisations that isn't working for people. Yeah, it doesn't translate. It just doesn't.
People are calling it the concrete ceiling. And certainly I've spoken locally to some people who keep referring to the snowy tops. And this is definitely something we need to change. All I can say is locally, I think what helps as well is having multi-race interview panels, because I think that can really encourage people of Black and ethnic minority ethnic origins to apply for jobs. But again, institutionally, we need to look at that much more closely.
Thanks, Liana. And I think there's also a challenge for us there, that if we are committed to supporting people to progress in their career of Black and ethnic minority, from Black and ethnic minority communities, then we also need to look at what we're doing to support people in those roles once they're in. Because we've got another issue there with people exiting organisations because maybe they haven't had the right support. People haven't understood what the issues are in terms of support that's needed. The organisation hasn't been ready for that person in that leadership role, and that has then broken down and people exit the organisation. So I think there's a lot of work that we need to do as a profession and organisation wise to understand that it's not just about putting people in positions, it's about what else needs to sit around that to make that a positive experience for individuals, and to ensure that the organisation can benefit from that person being in that role because they're properly supported and the organisation's open and ready to changing in response to that. So I think, there's a huge amount of work, but again, having these conversations, that's the starting point. It's recognising, it's being alert, it's looking at what's going on. What are we doing about it? Encouraging people to make suggestions about that, and to be asking those questions about what are we doing about this.
think also, Elizabeth, if I could say, I think sort of, you know, when you are more senior in an organisation, if you're from a black or minority group, at times you're expected to be the voice, and people come to you to ask, is this correct, or what do you think about that? And I think there's something about actually you're not there as that lone voice.
No.
And actually it's about other people's learning. And to me, that is another form of discrimination, the fact that people are coming to you and expecting that you have got the answers to any issue about race, any issue about discrimination. You know, it's not acceptable.
No, and absolutely exhausting. I mean, how on earth are you going to be expected to do your job when you're dealing with all of that as well? Is you know, anybody's guess really. But I think that's also an issue. And that issue about maybe kind of tokenism, or it being one person's responsibility, and then the organisation can kind of sit back from that and not kind of do anything different because they've got that person imposed who can kind of deal with all of that.
Or they think you are going to be the person that actually, if there's an issue around race, you're that person that's going to respond.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
For the organisation.
Yeah. So lots of learning and some suggestions now as we kind of work through around what organisations might need to do differently to respond to that challenge as well. So hopefully some of the material that we might not get through everything today, and I forgot to say that at the beginning, we might not get through everything today, but you will get a copy of everything, so it'll be there for you to kind of look at and reference. But there's definitely some helpful information around how organisations can work to demonstrate their commitment to anti-racism and what they need to do to make those changes, which hopefully will be something that you can take back and use in your workplace to kind of create that change and challenge as well. Thank you everybody for your comments there. I'm just going to move us on now, unless anyone else wants to come in at all on that. No. Okay, that's fine. Just stop me if you do. So we're talking, and that moves us on kind of nicely to what we're talking about with regard to the workplace, and kind of thinking about workforce inequalities. And we talked then about the representation. So we've got good representation at grassroots level there. You can see the statistics in the top slide, but there are concerns that that's not the case across the UK. So representation in some areas is not reflective of communities served by the profession. So we've still got a challenge around that and how we're looking at that. We've talked about the senior management, excuse me, being far lower in terms of black and ethnic minority practitioners than there are on the front line. Excuse me. Concerns have also been raised about the disproportionate representation of black social workers in agency work, which is an interesting aspect really that I think we don't have any data about really, or very limited data, and we could do with some research in that area really to help us to understand and unpick what's going on there. But we've got particular issues that have been highlighted to us as an organisation through the pandemic around the treatment of black agency workers during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the expectation on workers, and particularly to be carrying out visits without access to PPE when that wasn't the case for white counterparts. But also being expected to go into the office maybe when other people were able to work from home. That was another example that came through our advice and representation service. We also know there are representational issues depending on which route people choose to come into social work in. So there's differences depending on whether it's postgraduate, undergraduate courses, or fast track providers. Although fast track providers have improved their representation, it's still not comparable or where it needs to be. There's also issues which I kind of alluded to earlier in the presentation, particularly around what's going on with fitness to practice. So under the social work regulator, Social Work England, there's a disproportionate number of black and ethnic minority social workers who are subject to investigations. In terms of data, they haven't got the data to be able to show exact figures on that, so we are pressing them on that. And we also know that they inherited a number of cases historically from the previous social work regulator, Healthcare Professions Council. But from our perspective, that's very worrying that they're starting off with that kind of situation. And there's also other information that's come to light, and there's been very recent community care articles about the disproportionate number of social workers in their first year in practice, so the assessed and supported year in employment from Black and ethnic minority populations that again are subject to fitness to practice or not going through to pass their first year in practice through their assessed and supported year in employment. So there's issues there around the regulator, but also what's going on in these employment circumstances, and we've been trying to unpick some of that, I think, throughout the presentation. So there are issues within the profession, and what we really need to do now is to kind of get underneath those. And certainly our social workers union have been very vocal around those issues and bringing them to the fore and putting them out there into the public domain so that we can get that dialogue going and start to look with the regulator and employers at what's happening there, and particularly Skills for Care as well, who oversee the assessed and supported year in employment. So that's kind of the sort of statistical picture and the data. I think we want to come on to kind of some of what's been happening in response to that. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about the workforce race and equality standard, which I think somebody mentioned in the chat earlier. You'll hear it referred to as its shorthand because we love to have an acronym in social work, don't we? We don't like to use the full title for anything. So it's called the RES, or Workforce Race Equality Standard, is what it actually is. So this is something that's currently being piloted across the UK, and there are 18 different local authorities that have signed up to be part of the pilot for this Workforce Race Equality Standard. Now, what this is all about, it's about establishing more robust intelligence and accountability through the collection of data, through the collection of experiences of the workforce, so that it can enable organisations to have a better look at what's going on inside. What are the experiences of people that are working there? What's happening in their organisation, particularly around issues around racism and around the way that staff are treated within that organisation. So the NHS has had this in place since 2015. So what are we now, 2021? So we're 6 years behind, but we're there now, we're getting there. So we've used their kind of model as an example and adapted that to our, and it's not just for social work, this is for social care as well. We've adapted it for social care. And the NHS within their Workforce Race Equality Standard use what they call 9 indicators, which highlight differences in experience of Black, Asian, minority ethnic staff and white staff. And what that's enabled them to do is to identify where the gaps are, what's going on, have dialogue about that, and then take action to close those gaps and to address those inequalities or differences in experiences. So this is a positive thing. It's being piloted currently, but everybody will have the opportunity to learn from the pilot, even if they're not taking part. But the key to this, and the key to this working both at a local, regional and national level, is having that senior leadership endorsement. So senior leaders have got to be signed up to this, because it's about being open, honest and accountable and championing this right from the top. And it's got to permeate through the whole organisation to every workforce that's within the organisation as well, to enable that deep examination of processes and culture, and then to focus on what's going to happen as a result of that, what action needs to be taken in response. So I'd be interested to know anybody's thoughts on that. And again, that is a positive move. It's not going to solve all of the problems. It will shine more of a light on those issues we've just highlighted in the previous slide around what's going on here with fitness to practice, what's going on with disproportionate representation, you know, for newly qualified social workers as well. But it's definitely a starting point. So that started this month. And they'll be reporting in from the different phases of that pilot as we go along. So there was an initial article again in community care around this, and then there'll be regular reporting and updates to the Chief Social Workers blog about what's happening and what progress and what examples are coming through from the different local authorities that are engaged in the pilot. So one of the questions you might be thinking about asking is your local authority or organisation engaged in the pilot? If not, how are they making sure that they are keeping abreast of what the learning is, or feeding into that learning, or understanding, you know, what developments there are around this pilot, so that they can kind of get ready for when this comes in. Okay. So a couple more just kind of examples, I suppose, around what we've been hearing about what's been happening in workplaces during the pandemic, because I think this is important to share in feeding into those comments about covert racism in the workplace and how issues can be quashed, and the channels for reporting them, or the mechanisms, or, you know, the culture for highlighting issues can easily be destroyed, really, and cannot be there in the first place, I suppose. And these are examples that, again, from a Stand Up to Racism conference that I went to at the end of last year, where people from lots of different organisations were sharing their experiences. And it was clear that the reporting in from trade union colleagues was that during COVID-19, people who are Black and ethnic minority in workplaces have experienced racism and microaggressions, and that people were feeling that there was an empathy gap when they were working with colleagues who were from a different colour, and in particular white colleagues. There was an empathy gap from white colleagues as to the experiences of Black and ethnic minority colleagues who were at work during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's got some clear kind of implications for us as social workers in thinking about how are we responding during the pandemic to the issues, the kind of different issues that are being experienced by Black and ethnic minority communities and our colleagues as well. How are we responding to that? Are we sensitive to that? Are we supportive, or are we just ignoring that, or just not even aware that that's what's going on? This is another example here. So when someone who was acting in a union representative role asked their employer about the COVID-19 risk assessment for colleagues, so for Black and ethnic minority colleagues, they were told they were scaremongering and creating panic. So they were just basically shut down, and that opportunity for that risk assessment, which we know is vital in ensuring people's health and safety, just wasn't even being acknowledged, and worse than that, was just being disregarded completely. Therefore, people's health and safety being disregarded completely. And as a result of that, what happened in that organisation was that Black and minority ethnic colleagues don't raise issues, and they don't ask for the risk assessment. They just get on with their job and put themselves at risk because they don't feel that there's any other option. Another example that was given by people that might be writing blogs for Black Lives Matter is that they've been told by doing that they are making other people within the organisation feel that they are racist. So again, thinking there about what that's all about. So that's kind of that idea about white fragility. So, you know, being oversensitive and thinking that, you know, someone writing a blog about racism and about their experience and what's happening for them, that's too difficult for white colleagues to, you know, entertain. You know, they don't want to be thought about or consider that they might be complicit in that or part of that, or that they're doing things that are contributing to that, and therefore that's being dismissed, and you know, the Black colleague is being shut down. And saying that they're making other people feel that they're racist. So I think that those are examples that really kind of illustrate those covert things that are going on within organisations that can really reinforce these racist structures and that institutional racism that's happening, and particularly in that organisation and at every kind of level there. So thinking more about this here and about kind of what the responses might be. So covert, entrenched and everyday racism in the workplace, like with those examples that just provided us there, sometimes indicate the lack of quality, cultural diversity and multicultural education and training that's available for all staff within organisations. Surprisingly, it is rarely acknowledged in social work that race is simply a socially constructed idea with no scientific validity, invented and refined principally to oppress people of colour. This has modern and everyday ramifications in the working environment. Black and ethnic minority practitioners have reported to us at BASW that personal protective equipment was clearly prioritised or withheld on occasions for white colleagues. Others explained that they were made or ordered to visit people with suspected COVID-19 with no PPE, no guidance and no support, whilst white managers stayed at the office with their supply of PPE and engaged in racist banter. These perverse experiences can be impossible for victims of naked and slippery everyday racism to articulate to others or to reconcile internally themselves. Furthermore, these incidents are normalised and subsumed in many workplace cultures with very limited opportunities to professionally offload. In some cases, it's really not hard to see who the direct descendants of slave owners are. With some people, it stands out like a beacon, regardless of what they say and do. So I'm just going to pause again there and just check in with everybody and just see if everyone's okay, and if anyone wants to kind of comment on that information that's been shared to the last few slides at all. I'm sorry, I've seemed to have lost the chat again for I'm not very good at Zoom, unfortunately. Let me just pop that back. That's not it. Oh, hi.
I equally missed some of the chat. Sorry, I had to rejoin. My Zoom is not working very well. But I think Movita said she was leaving in the chat as far as I can see. And then Rosemary was commenting on the, saying that it was deep. Wow. So I think we all felt those words.
Thank you, Liana. Yeah, I think some of the things that we've, that have been kind of reported through to us through the pandemic around how people are being treated in the workplace, are absolutely shocking. And I just want to assure people in the room that our advice and representation service have taken those issues up with those individual employers in response to that. People haven't been left in unsafe situations. So I just want to reiterate that. But there continues to be, that kind of information is shared, and it kind of, it's grown and changed depending on what's been happening with the situation with the pandemic. But I think that when you were referring before to the interview with Oprah, Meghan and Harry, again, we've had colleagues reporting through to our advice and representation services about the kind of discussions that have been taking place in the workplace in response to that interview and how that's kind of made them feel, and the experiences that they've had in the workplace since that interview. So I think there's been a number of different other things that are kind of, again, feeding into this workplace experience and that kind of entrenched in everyday racism and how that's kind of normalised within organisations. And again, this is another kind of wake-up call for us, to be the need to be alert to that and the need to be aware continually of how that can manifest and what the impact of that is on people as well. Okay. I'm just going to move us on then next to just focus on this slide, which is around helping us to understand the impact of racism on mental health, and thinking about the individuals, families and communities that we work with as well, and our colleagues. And again, that when we were talking before about that psychological burden of constantly being asked, being the individual that everybody comes to within the organisation, or the organisation, making you that person that everybody comes to ask about any issue about race or diversity or anything, but also then how that feeds into that experience of racism and how that can impact on individuals, families and communities as well. So just leaving that there for a moment, but those feelings of powerlessness, being in that increased survival mode all the time, so that kind of fight or flight response that we experience when we're in danger, and then the impact that can have on physical health as well, if you're in that constant state of flux all of the time. trauma, both from what's going on now, what's happened in the past, and generational trauma as well. So thinking about, you know, what's been happening to both families and communities and whole societies through the past, and how the impact of that is felt by individuals as well. And that kind of existential questioning, that how can the world be so cruel, and really not kind of being able to kind of find any answers or resolution within that, and becoming quite kind of disenchanted with everything really, and disenfranchised from what's going on really as well. Okay, I'll just pause on that image a moment as well. And again, some of this commentary might be things that you hear or you're challenged with, both in your personal life and professional life as well. And I think that just kind of highlights some of those kind of conversations that can occur, or off the cuff comments that can be made. Okay, this that's on screen now is a model that was developed, or has been developed, sorry, by Gurnam Singh, who is a long-standing lecturer around social work, a prominent anti-racist educator. He's based at the University of Birmingham, and he came up with this model back in July last year, as you'll see on there, the reference. And this is a way to kind of understand that concept of whiteness that we were talking about before, and the way that white supremacy and these different kind of categories, what the behaviours, or what are the different kind of aspects of these particular things that exist, that kind of permeate and maintain the racist kind of status quo. So, and again, there's some interesting images there as well. And I think this is a really helpful tool to be used. It can be used on an individual basis for individual reflection. It can be used in supervision. It can be used in teams. Maybe if you're kind of at that point where you're already having conversations about racism and about what's happening within your organisation, what's happening in the community that you're working with. If you're already at that stage, this might be something that can be used to help to think more about these different concepts. And it can be used in a number of different ways, really. I think I'm just going to pause there for a moment, just give you a chance to kind of digest what's in those kind of different areas, and kind of maybe come back in for some commentary from people on that. So I'll just leave that up for a few minutes.
Is there any chance of you being able to make it a bit bigger? I can just about see the writing.
Yeah, I think you can do that on your own screen. If you can enlarge your own screen, I think that's the way to do it. But let me just double check on here.
Yeah.
I think no, mine just gives me a spyglass. If you know, oh, there we go. But I'll have to let's just see if we can do that. Let me do it again. I think you can definitely do it on your own screen as well. Let me just fix it back out to that. I can't get the whole thing on screen at once bigger.
Is there any area that you want us to read out?
I can't see it elsewhere.
Okay, sorry. Maybe when we send the slides, it would help. Yeah,
so wait for the slides to come. Yeah, thank you.
I'm just yeah, I think if you can do it on your own screen. I'm just gonna see if I can help you to work out how to do that. If anyone knows how to do that, I know there is a way to do it. It's just I don't want to start messing about on here and then lose the material. If anyone does know how to, you can individually.
There's an option at the top of my screen that says view options and then a little drop down.
Okay.
I don't know if everybody has that, but there's a zoom ratio on there, so I'm not sure if that helps. Screen that's making it a bit bigger.
Thanks.
Right at the top next to the green tab at the top.
Brilliant. Yeah, I haven't got that on my screen because I think I'm in presenter mode. So I think it looks a bit different.
But hopefully everyone else can see that, and they should be able to change the zoom ratio.
Oh, thank you for that. Thanks. Does that help at all? Just checking in with the people if they've managed to do that.
I just want to say thanks to Rachel there, because she was just pointing out there, because obviously I'm looking at the images just as everybody else can't see particularly well. But Rachel there, because Rachel, I think you mentioned before that Zoom isn't letting you talk. Is that correct? But anyhow, you were saying they're Gone with the Wind is the image on the left.
Yeah, that's right.
And the lady on the right was the first African American to win an Oscar in a supporting role.
Yes. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yes, I wouldn't have, you know, I didn't recognize that image at all. So thanks for giving us a bit more information there that it helps us to make sense of those images and the power they're trying to convey to us.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I was also just saying in the sidebar that, you know, we saw there the images. I think the impact on racism, it was powerful to see and so concerning to know, you know, how people are or maybe feeling. And I just wanted to kind of extend the invitation. I'm not sure if we have other principal social workers in the room, but I was just saying, you know, I just wanted to encourage social workers or practitioners. It doesn't have to be a social worker, you know, if you're working in adult social care, just to encourage you to talk to your principal social worker. If you need or want to discuss anything in relation to racism in your work, or if you're experiencing anything bad and you feel that you can't discuss that with your manager or your colleague, then then please feel free to contact your principal social worker. It's part of their role to be looking after your well-being as an individual working in the adult social care system. Or also just wanted to say that you know, do be encouraged to record it as a health and safety incident, because that is what it is at the end of the day. And again, your employer has the responsibility to looking, you know, to supporting your well-being. So do use those mechanisms. And then the Employees Assistance Program, I don't know if all councils here subscribe to that, but we do in Barking and Dagenham. There's a number, it's available, I think 24 hours. And you can literally talk to them about anything. And no information gets fed back to your manager unless you request for that to be the case. So they literally don't give any information to HR. So if you feel that you want to discuss something privately and confidentially, and you just need to get it off your chest and you don't know who to call, again, please just be encouraged, you know, to call and use those systems. I know it's hard. I think it's extra hard for social workers to talk about things because we absorb so much from other people. You know, even I think the things that our people are saying that are racist, we're still trying to provide a service to them and trying to support their well-being. But please be encouraged, you know, to log it as a health and safety issue and to talk to people about it. Please don't feel alone. You know, and hopefully together we can even make it better if you're willing to give the details around that. Yeah.
Thank you, Liana. Really good points. And I've got the chat back now, which is helpful. Thank you. And I'm sorry if people are having difficulties with microphone as well, but please do use the chat if you're able to. I'm just picking up on a couple of comments, just scrolling back through. So we've got one here. Has anti-racism in social work practice only become prominent in the last year, or has this always been a topic of debate within social work practice? Well, that's a really interesting question, because many moons ago when the social work training, I think when it was the old what's called the CQSW, so Certificate Qualification in Social Work, anti-racism was one of the prominent aspects of study in social work training. And that changed, and there was a lot of activism in social work at that time, and that was very much seen as part of the role. And that changed when we moved to the diploma in social work. So there was less of a focus on anti-racism. And then obviously we've diversified into a number of different kind of routes into social work now. So social work is a degree profession, which is a positive step forward. But I think within that, certainly I think academics would argue that within that, there was then lost that focus around anti-racism that there was in previous years and in previous qualifications. And I think when we had a quick look at the professional standards before, and if you have a look at the social working and social education and training standards now, you won't see that mention of anti-racism. And the problem with that is that then allows there to be minimal or no kind of teaching on this as a subject area, when we know that this is a kind of fundamental aspect of the work that we need to be doing, particularly if we're saying that one of our values is around social justice, and it's around challenging discrimination, oppression and abuse. Then that's absolutely about racism. So what I would say is it's become a more prominent topic of discussion and debate and focus over the last 12 months, but it's always been there. But we should ask ourselves why, as a profession, it's not been at the forefront of what we're doing, really. I think that's the question we ought to be asking ourselves. How have we lost our way with that, really? So I'm just going to pop down commenting here. Yeah, I think COVID-19 has pointed out further health inequalities for Black and minority ethnic people. Yes, let's have a look here. We've also got some other commentary here about inequalities. Implementing no tolerance letters to people from management about not tolerating racial abuse. Yes, I think that happens. I think you're saying that happens in the NHS. There's also, interestingly, at the moment, the new police and crime bill that's out at the moment. There's listed professions where abuse, I think it's assault, the charge of assault, the professionals. There's a zero tolerance policy on that, but social work's not included as one of those professions. So there's a petition at the moment that is out for people to sign around that. I mean, that's obviously wider than what we're talking about here, but just picking up on that particular issue. Yeah, more commentary around the imagery on this slide. I wonder if anyone's got any kind of commentary around, when you're looking at those different kind of the different categories, if you like, and it's not for you to say, oh, I fall into this category or I fall into that. I mean, personally, if I talk about this on a personal level, I know throughout my life and throughout my career, there are things, my inaction may sometimes have fallen into this white supremacy category here. That's quite an uncomfortable thing for me to admit. But I think that some of my inaction has kind of, could have been seen to fall into that, to kind of been maintaining that sort of white supremacist structure. I mean, that's an interesting comment in there about subscribing to scientific racism, when we know that there is no scientific basis for racism. It's socially constructed. And this idea in white indifference here, willing to tolerate, fetishize, pity the non-white or other, or happy to make tokenistic gestures but totally refuse to accept one's own complicity. So that was that bit before about when we talked about when I mentioned that example about someone writing for the Black Lives Matter blog, and then them being told by their manager that they need to stop doing that because that's kind of making other people in the team feel that they're that they're racist. So it's that kind of thing, really. In here, whiteness is denied, so there's a denial that even exists as a concept, so therefore it can just remain unchallenged and continue as is. And in the white awareness category here, so feeling of guilt around historic racism, desire to make amends. Yes, I certainly experienced that when I was talking about my reaction to the KCMG medal earlier, but actually the most important thing is this bit in the next category around allyship, around what am I doing about that, as one of our colleagues in the room pointed out, what action am I taking in response to that. So I think that there are different things in each of these kind of categories that maybe at one time or another our actions or inactions or something that we've observed or felt can be kind of linked or explained or explored using this model. So hopefully it's helpful in that sense, and hopefully it's helpful in terms of opening up these kind of conversations and keeping them open and alive, and the opportunity to kind of discuss these difficult, uncomfortable things here. I'm just double checking in the chat whether we've got any other comments on this. Does anyone else want to make any comments about this model? You know, about, you know, what your thoughts about it are? I'm just going to have a quick check in the chat. Someone said they like it, have it on the wall, look at it daily. Rachel's got a question, so bear with me, no problem at all. That's fine. Yeah. The white indifference column, what does it mean by academic freedom? Let's have a look at that. Passionate defender of Western universalism, academic freedom and the right to offend. So that's all about the kind of free speech mantra, you know, that in academia you should be free to express whatever opinions you see fit, really. So having that, you know, the ability to express yourself. Freedom of speech means that includes expressing views or things that are racist and that other people may find discriminatory or offensive. Yeah. Okay, hopefully, yeah, that's great. Okay, that's great. Okay, so I'm conscious of time and we're on 4:15, we're finishing at 4:30, so I'm just going to move us on here. There are other models that you might want to look at that can kind of help explore that whole concept regime of whiteness, it's called here. So this breaks it down into other kind of categories as well. So one that you were talking about a lot when we're talking about racism is this idea about white privilege. So a deep investment in questions of fairness and equality under the normalization of whiteness and the white rule with the sworn goal of diversity. So really kind of thinking about what's going on with that white privilege. And that's about, white privilege is about the privilege that's afforded to me as a white person within society that's not afforded to people from Black and ethnic minority communities, and how I might not even be aware of any of that or what that brings with it, the privilege that brings with it. I might be completely oblivious to that, but I may be benefiting from that all the time. And actually, if I'm made aware of that and I don't then want to change the situation, I'm wanting to maintain that, aren't I? And that white privilege is then keeping the status quo that we're in now. It's not allowing any change to be created. There's other categories within here. This one, white confessional, some exposure of whiteness takes place, but as a way of being accountable to people of colour after the event. So it's allowing things that are racist to permeate and acknowledging that that's sort of going on and don't really agree with it and feel a bit uncomfortable, but then just kind of seeking that validation from people of colour. But actually, because I feel uncomfortable or I wasn't sure how to deal with it, that's okay, isn't it? It's okay that I've let that go. Because I wasn't really sure about what to do, or that's quite difficult to challenge. So I've sort of just not done anything there. So that's an interesting one. So I think having a look at these kind of models again, they're all there just to kind of generate that conversation and help to kind of explore these concepts and get a kind of understanding about what they are and how they might impact on people. This visual here helps us to kind of understand, I suppose, or this infographic helps us to kind of understand how white supremacy functions within our society. So the top of the pyramid here, so it's a pyramid shape. So at the top, it's things that everybody would come out and say are completely unacceptable. These are things that if we're faced with these, or we see these, or we hear them, we're presented with them, we would say, no, that's totally unacceptable. So we've got lynching, hate crime, we say is unacceptable, using the N-word, Ku Klux Klan, racial slurs, neo-Nazis, racist jokes, swastikas, burning crosses. So they're very kind of out there, over symbols that people would identify with immediately and say, no, that's not acceptable. But interestingly, on the lower half, so under the line, are all the things that go on that are socially acceptable, that people let go or just accept or are not aware of or are oblivious to or feed into. and they're classed as socially acceptable, and they're the covert white supremacy things that are going on. So the things that we were talking about before in the workplace, things that are happening in people's personal lives that we hear all the time, the communities that we're working in, these are the things that kind of perpetuate and keep that white supremacy going under the surface. So just to highlight a few things there: denial of racism, not challenging racist jokes, denial of white privilege, racial profiling, white savior complex. So thinking in my allyship role that I'm going to come in and don't worry, I'm going to sort out all of this racism. It's okay, you don't need to worry about it. I've got it covered here. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to sort all of this out. And thinking that you can come in and take over and then reinforce your kind of white privilege, that would come into this part of the pyramid. That exclamation, all lives matter, or what about me? Inequitable healthcare, English only initiatives, self-appointed white allies there as well. So suggesting to someone of colour, you're so articulate, as if that is a surprise, or shouldn't be expected. Claiming reverse racism is something there. Sorry, did someone want to come in? Please do if you do.
I just wanted to say, I don't know if Rachel Hippen, you can say there, but I was actually wondering the same thing. Rachel, I assume, Rachel, you can't put your mic on, so I don't want to speak for you. What is bootstrap theory? So yeah, equally, I was wondering what that was.
Let me have a look. Where's that? I'm just trying to see.
Thanks, Rachel. You were saying, go ahead.
Let me have a look.
Yeah, so that's definitely one for us to research.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find it on the pyramid. Let me just have a quick look. Sorry, apologies if I can't see that immediately. Oh yeah, bootstrap theory. Yeah, no, I don't know actually. I'd have to look that up. I'm going to be honest and say I know most of the things that are on here. I don't know that. I'll look that up and send that with the I'll send it round with the email after the session.
I wonder if that was used to lynch people or to
no, do I know?
Harm individuals.
Oh, I do know. I just yeah, let me think. Bootstrap theory. Oh, let me send it round after the session rather than me.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So anyway.
Yeah.
Good people are asking questions, so we're all learning together.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. No, thank you for drawing my attention to that, because I do know somewhere in the depths of my mind what that is, but I can't recall it. So thank you for posing that question as well. Sorry, I'm just going to go back into that. I've lost the chat again now. There we go.
I don't know. Okay, I can. So Rosemary there was talking about tie your bootstraps and get on with it, basically. And then
bootstraps. That's exactly it. It's there. It's
yes.
that thing that.
Oh, interesting.
So it was after slavery when they were promised, black people were promised 40 acres and a mule.
Yeah,
and that promise was negated, and they were just told to just tie your boot laces up and get on with it. Well, they had boots, but it didn't have laces, so they had no way of competing. No. So that's where it comes from.
That's right. Thank you very much for that, Rosemary, and that's really helpful to explain it in that way. That's right, and it's about people being told to, get on with it, progress. You've got the means to progress now, so it's up to you. And kind of that whole.
Yeah, well, they didn't even have the means. In other words, they had the freedom, but they didn't have the means because they were supposed to be given 40 acres and a mule, so they didn't get that. Yeah.
Thank you very much for explaining that. Yeah, and perhaps we can send a reference to more material on that. I'll do that after the session as well. Thank you. So again, I think this is another kind of tool just to help explore some of these concepts and some of the things that we've been talking about today and how they might manifest, and showing people, how deep-rooted these things are and where they come from, exploring where they come from, and that although we might think that we're alert to some of these things, maybe we're not. Maybe we're only alert to the things at the top of the pyramid and not those that are underneath. And there's a lot more under there that we do need to be alert to, as we've just learned then, that we need to continue to keep researching, finding out, understanding the implications of these things as well. Okay. Thank you for that. So in here, I suppose, just kind of drawing back to what we're thinking about with social workers, that it's our job, and anyone that's kind of working with people, families and communities, anyone across social care, it's our job to kind of evaluate, you know, our role, where we're at, what are our moral and regulatory responsibilities, you know, to be proactive, to keep up to date with issues so that we can be astute allies to our Black and ethnic minority colleagues and the people that we're working with. And Black and ethnic minority social workers cannot and should not be expected to fix the racism in their workplace. Okay, and this comes again from the perspective of Wayne. So those of us who are confident and capable enough with the right support can have a crucial role in educating, empowering and equipping ourselves and potential allies and influencers to enhance and shape anti-racism initiatives in our workplace settings. Everybody has a duty to combat racism and other forms of discrimination in the spaces that they occupy. This includes reporting racist incidents where they occur. We've had some helpful information about how to do that earlier. Forming like-minded alliances with peers to tackle issues, raising awareness and making suggestions for positive reform. And that's about all of us involved in the profession. So these concepts again here are the barriers to meaningful organisational change, which is why the onus is on us to kind of do our homework to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about whiteness, what we're talking about with white fragility, white privilege and white supremacy, and how those things exist, how we're part of those things, how I as a white person am part of those things, and I benefit from those things in the current systems that we have within society. And that unless I'm willing to examine, unless we're all willing to kind of examine and understand the impact of that and how that disadvantages people of colour, then we're not going to get anywhere here. We're not going to get anywhere within society, within our organisations, within that kind of culture. So we've got to be aware and alert as individuals, but as organisations as well. And that's the first step for us all. Again, thinking about that, it's not enough to be non-racist, we must be anti-racist. So we've got to be willing to make that commitment to create change. So I just wanted to show you this graphic quickly, and just again conscious of the time, then I want to show you one more slide before we finish, but please be assured that you'll get all of the information through so that you can have a look at this yourselves to take this forward. When we talked earlier about the impact of having, you know, that microaggressions in the workplace and banter and those things that are happening on that everyday level that maybe we can't quite call them out, or they're not quite obvious, they kind of come into this bottom layer of the pyramid here. And what this is called the pyramid of hate. And what it does is it shows us that at each level in the pyramid, if these things go unchecked and they're allowed to take root and they're allowed to happen and people ignore them, that then creates the conditions for the next layer of the pyramid to occur. So if we let stereotypes go, if we let non-inclusive language go, or if we, you know, justify our biases by seeking out like-minded people within organisations and allow that to continue and confirm that we're all right, really, we're not really racist. Such a body says we're not really racist, so that's okay, I can carry on saying these things. If we allow that, that then creates the conditions where bullying, name-calling, ridicule, social avoidance, dehumanisation of people, which is something we've talked about in the chat, bias and belittling jokes can start to occur. And once that starts to happen, then we get into this next layer of the pyramid where it's possible for discrimination to occur. And this is, we're talking then at a structural level. So we're talking about economic discrimination, political discrimination, discrimination in education, employment, housing, segregation to occur, and for there to be disparities within the criminal justice system, which we can see within our society. And if that's allowed to continue and allowed to permeate and allowed to take root, that then creates the conditions for this, the bias-motivated violence, the murder, rape, assault, arson, terrorism, vandalism, desecration, threats. And what we're seeing now through the police brutality is that we're into this bias-motivated violence. It's taken that kind of hold within society that that's becoming the norm, the normal way that the police are reacting to situations because of these things have gone unchecked here. And eventually, if that continues, then that will lead to genocide, which we know is the act or intent to deliberately and systematically annihilate an entire people, as in the example of what was happening and what has been happening in Zimbabwe. So again, that's hopefully something that helps to kind of open up these conversations and explain, you know, when challenges happening around what's maybe going on in the workplace, or casual conversations in, you know, between friendship groups, social situations, those kinds of things. It's really important to have this in mind, that if those things go unchecked that are regarded as casual or, you know, humour, then that can very easily lead to these other layers of this pyramid taking hold within our society. This slide is from the Anti-Defamation League as well, and references are all in with the slides as well. So I just want to kind of come on, there's other models there that help us to understand more about racism. And that's a really important slide around the women in the workplace that I think alludes to some of the conversations we were having earlier about what happens when people aren't supported. People are brought into particular roles and then aren't supported, and people's experience within the workplace. So I would urge you to have a look at that and maybe use that as an opportunity for discussions with senior leadership teams as well. Within the slides here, there's different organisational responses. It's this slide here I just wanted to draw your attention to, which is around the anti-racist commitment framework for organisations. And within this, there are ideas about what organisations can do to show that their commitment to anti-racism, to make those changes that help to bring about an anti-racist culture within organisations as well. So there's different areas and suggestions there. Okay, I'm conscious now we're at 4:30, so I'm just going to leave that slide there for a second, and just be assured that you will get all of this information through to you after the session today. Okay. I'm just going to come back into the screen now, so I'm just going to stop sharing, but you will get all of this information after the session, and just come back in. So I'd just like to say a huge thank you for people for listening today, for your contributions, and for bearing with me and bearing with us. And I really hope that today's been helpful in the start of some of those conversations and some of those reflections. And it's been educational for me, as it always is. So thank you for everybody's input and for your challenge today. I'm happy to take any kind of final comments or questions that anybody would like to make. I'm just having a quick okay, thank you. Thank you, and I can see that there's some other messages in the chat as well. So yeah, there's a comment from Charles about the feedback form, which is great, and I'm open to any feedback that people would like to give. And I just thank you for everybody for bearing with us today, and for all the contributions. And I really hope that today is the start of, you know, more anti-racism conversations for you, both in the workplace and within organisations, and more challenge around what we're doing as a profession in response to racism as well. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and thanks for having me today.
Thank you.
And take care, everybody. And I really hope.
Alice,
Take care.
When we started, Lillian, I think Lillian said that it will count towards our PDP, you know, the thing we submit for social work England.
Oh, CPD, Continuous Professional Development, yes.
So how do we do that? I filled a form earlier on. I don't know if that is the answer.
Okay, no problem. Maybe I can help with that. So we're required, what we're required to do, Social Work England have got information on their website about how you can submit your continuous professional development. They've got a structured form where you can set out how you meet the different standards. Or they've got something called an unstructured form where you can write freely about this session. So what you've learned today, what your reflections are, how are you going to take that learning forward, and think about the impact that learning is going to have on your practice.
Oh, so no, it's not a matter of you sending something to them. We have to write it up.
Yeah, that would be for you to submit. So
okay.
So you'll go onto the system and their system and have a look at what you're required to do. And you can use what you've learned today. You can upload this as a piece of evidence. So you might upload the presentation, say I've been to this, but you would then need to write something reflective about what your learning has been and how that's going to impact on your practice.
Okay, all right, that's good.
No problem. Thank you, everyone. Any other questions?
I just wanted to say that pyramid. I wonder if you can put that up again for me, because I know I saw at the top there was genocide, and I think that's the pyramid, the system in which they use to create conflict in African countries. And continue to.
Yeah, let me bring that up for you again. No problem. Hang on, let me just go back to it. Hopefully you can see my screen now, and I'll just pop that. Yeah, no problem. This one.
Yeah, this pyramid here.
Yeah.
Bias attitude. Yeah. It's the system they use to create conflict in our African countries.
Yeah.
Hello.
I think it's quite. I mean,
just finishing the training.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is a useful way to kind of to draw attention to that, and Rosemary as well, what you've just been saying there about how how that conflict is then created, how it's not allowed to take root, but just how it's implanted, really, how it's kind of cultivated.
That's what it is. It's cultivated. That's what they do. They go amongst and cultivate it and grow it until it gets to the point where genocide occurs, and then they're killing one another.
Yes.
Thank you. It's been a great session. I'm looking forward to the next one. I really am. Very close to me, this subject.
Thank you. And any feedback that you would like to provide after the session, I've Alda sent a form that you can complete. So anything that you'd like to suggest, and anyone here that would like to suggest anything, more than happy to hear that, because we're just looking to improve and look at what else is needed as well, really, for the session. So thank you.
Hi, Lee.
Sorry.
Liz, before you go, I did ask a question regarding how BASW can reach the local authorities or organizations regarding this, because this is very interesting. So I'm not sure whether the anti-racism framework, is it the way that you will be able to reach the organizations, or is there anything that BASW is planning to do? Because this is really, really important especially for us social workers, that the local authorities should be reached to tackle this.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really interesting question, and I'm sorry if I missed that. My ability to be able to access the chat has been intermittent throughout the session today. So we are in conversation all the time with local authorities, and some local authorities have asked us to come and do this presentation for them, because that's going to be part of their anti-racism journey, and we talked to them about the anti-racism commitment framework, so it's there for them to use. We can come and talk to them about it any time, and we do tell local authorities and other organisations about it. I suppose it's what people then do with it once they've got that information. So I think some of it is about what's happening at that national level, like we were talking about with the workforce race equality standard. But some of it is also about, organisations demonstrating that commitment to the workforce. So what I would say is BASW are open to talking to any organisation about that, and we are talking to some local authorities about that. But unfortunately, that's reliant on them coming to us and wanting to engage us in that kind of conversation. So that's the way that it works at the moment. It's not mandatory for them to do that, but any social worker can discuss these issues with us and about maybe how to have those conversations in their organisation about how to, you know, how to use that anti-racist commitment framework and go back with some ideas to organisations. So I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Liz. Sorry, I'm back in the room again. Third time lucky, as they say. I just wanted to say a big thank you on behalf of everybody here and in the North East London Teaching Partnership. I thought you relayed the information really well. And as you were saying, we're very much on an anti-racist journey. And I think, you know, we will influence each other as we go and learn from each other as we go. That's the important thing. And that we support each other to make actual real change, because I think the actions are the thing that's key. You know, it's my father always says talk is cheap, but money buys the whiskey. So at the end of the day, it's very much about what we can actually do to enable the changes that we need in our society to deliver better outcomes for our service users and our community, and also to make a happier workplace and an environment where social workers can thrive. Be themselves and, you know, participate in the story really of the people that we get in contact with. So thank you so much for that this afternoon. Thank you, Charles, and Megan also for standing by and helping us along. I was just saying, of course, we know that the event is taking place again in July. Wayne Reed, I think, is leading that session. So hopefully it will be a bit more diverse. So sorry about that to some extent. I think I was one of the only people that were available for this afternoon to support, but certainly, you know, yeah, the future session will be more reflective, I think, of our workforce as well. So we're looking forward to that. And this is recorded. The other session will be recorded as well. So encourage your manager, your supervisor, your colleague to have a look. Nice to see you too, Connie, there. All right. Take care from my side.
Bye.
Awesome. Thanks to everyone for attending, and I'll send out the slides and all the information to you in the next few days.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.